There is a story told about an old man who sat by a fire in ancient Greece and spoke to the people around him. He spoke in the way that teachers have always spoken, through stories, not through lessons or lectures or rules written on tablets, through stories about animals, about a lion who met a fox, about a dog who would not share what he could not eat, about a goose who laid golden eggs, about a tortoise who won a race that everyone assumed was already decided. The man's name was Aesop. He lived in the 6th century before Christ, around 620 to 560 years before the Common Era began. In a world where Greece was still a scattering of city-states rather than a unified country, where the great philosophers had not yet been born, where the traditions of the Western world were still being assembled from older materials, he was, by most accounts, a slave born perhaps in Phrygia, in what is now Turkey, or perhaps in Thrace, or perhaps in Ethiopia. The ancient sources disagree on the details of his life, as they disagree on much else. What they agree on is that he was famous for his ability to teach wisdom through short stories about animals, and that the stories spread far beyond his lifetime and his world. He may have been freed because of the cleverness of his stories. He may have served as an ambassador or advisor to various rulers. He may have died at Delphi, the site of the great oracle, under circumstances that were disputed even in ancient times. Some accounts say he was killed by the people of Delphi for offending them. Whatever the truth of his biography, the stories that carry his name have been told and retold for 2,500 years, in every language that Europeans have spoken, and the telling continues tonight. The world Aesop came from was a world where animals were a constant presence. Greece in the 6th century before Christ was not a world of machines or cities of millions. It was a world of farms and fishing villages and mountain pastures, where the daily contact between human beings and animals was intimate and necessary. The shepherd knew his sheep individually. The farmer knew his oxen by their habits. The hunter knew the fox and the hare by the signs they left in the damp earth of the forest paths. Animals were not abstractions or metaphors. They were neighbors, difficult, various, sometimes dangerous, sometimes comforting, always present. When Aesop told a story about a wolf in sheep's clothing, his listeners knew wolves. When he told a story about a dog too greedy to share, his listeners had watched dogs. When he told a story about a heron who refused the small fish and missed the large, his listeners had fished in streams and watched herons stand in the shallows. Patient and particular, the animals in the stories were not fairy tale creatures. They were the actual animals of the actual world, speaking with human voices, but behaving in the ways that real animals behave, with real hungers, real fears, real blindnesses. This is what has kept the stories alive, not their moral lessons, though the moral lessons are real, not the clever endings, though the clever endings are genuinely satisfying. What has kept the stories alive is the truth of observation at their center, the accurate, patient observation of how animals behave, and the recognition that human beings behave in the same ways. The fox's cunning is human cunning. The dog's greed is human greed. The peacock's vanity is human vanity. The lion's power, the mouse's smallness, the tortoise's steadiness, all of these are human qualities too, drawn large and clear in the shape of the animals that embody them. The fire that Aesop sat beside burned for a while and went out, but the stories kept burning. There is a question worth sitting with for a moment before the stories begin. Why animals? The answer that seems most obvious is that animals are safe. You can tell a story about a wolf behaving like a tyrant, without anyone accusing you of insulting a particular person. The wolf is just a wolf. The powerful person in the room, who behaves like the wolf, hears the story, but has no direct target to deflect it onto. The story lands without an address on it, and the landing is often more accurate for the lack of address. Aesop was a slave. A slave could not easily say to his master's guests, "Your greed is destroying you." But a slave could tell the story of the goose and the golden egg, and the meaning would arrive just the same. The animals are also useful because they are fixed in their natures in a way that human beings are not. The fox is always clever. The wolf is always hungry. The tortoise is always slow and always steady. This fixedness is what makes the fable machine work. The outcome follows from the nature, and the nature is known in advance. When the fox meets a flattering situation, you can predict that the fox will respond with cleverness. When the wolf is denied what he wants through honest means, you can predict that the wolf will invent dishonest means. The nature of the animal is the constant that produces the lesson. Human beings, unlike animals, are not fixed in their natures. A human being can be a fox one day and an ox the next. A human being can learn. A human being can choose. The animals of the fables have no such flexibility, and this is what makes them useful. Their predictability is the mechanism by which the moral becomes clear. The fox who is always clever shows us what cleverness produces when it meets flattery, or a well, or a crow with meat. The result is always the same because the fox is always the same, and the lesson of the result is clear precisely because the nature producing it is constant. We, the listeners, are not fixed in our natures. We can hear the lesson. We can choose to apply it. The animals cannot. This is our advantage over the animals of the fables. And it is the entire point of listening to their stories. Tonight we tell some of them. We tell them in the old way, slowly, without hurry, in the gathering dark. We let the animals speak and act and make their choices and receive their consequences. We let the morals lie gently at the end of each story, not insisted upon, but simply there, offered for whoever wants them. Listen and sleep. The animals are already awake and ready in the dark, waiting for you to be still enough to hear them. The lion and his companions. The ancient Greeks who first told these stories lived in a world that was much smaller than ours, but was not simple. Greece in the 6th century, before the Common Era, was a civilization of city-states, each one its own political entity, each one with its own laws and customs and traditions. These cities traded and fought and formed alliances and broke them. The citizens of Athens were different from the citizens of Sparta in temperament and governance, and how they raised their children. The people of Corinth were known for their merchants and their bronze work and their sailors. The people of the small islands had their own particularities, but they shared stories. The shared stories were part of what made them recognizably Greek to each other, the shared myths, and the shared fables and the shared sense of what kinds of behavior were admired, and what kinds were condemned. The fables of Aesop were part of this shared inheritance. They circulated freely among people who had no other obvious connection. They were told in the Agora of Athens and on the docks of Piraeus and in the schoolrooms, where children learned to read, and in the fields where farmers worked. They were not high literature, not the epics or the tragedies that required performance and an audience. They were too short for that. They were the kind of story you told while you were doing something else, while you were walking or working or sitting around a fire, and the other person nodded because they had heard it before and nodded again, because it was still true. The lion lived in a forest. The lion lived in a forest. He had always lived in the forest. He was its largest creature and its most powerful, and he knew this about himself in the matter-of-fact way that the powerful often know their power, not with great drama, but with a quiet certainty. The other animals were aware of him. They arranged their days and his habits. When the lion moved through the forest, the birds fell silent in the branches above. When he slept, the whole forest seemed to breathe a little more easily. But the lion was also, in his way, practical. He understood that power had its limits. There were things he could not do alone. One morning the lion found himself in the company of an ass. The ass was long-eared and stubborn-looking, as asses tend to be. But he was also, and this is what the lion valued, capable of making a great deal of noise. Together they went hunting. They found a number of wild goats taking shelter in a cave on the hillside, and the lion formed a plan. The ass would go into the cave and drive the goats out with braying and kicking, and the general chaos that the ass could produce very effectively. The lion would stand at the entrance and strike them down as they came running. The plan worked exactly as the lion had intended. The ass went into the cave and made such a fearful din, braying and kicking, and throwing himself against the rock walls, that the goats came pouring out in a complete panic. And the lion was waiting for them. When the hunt was over and the goats were taken, the ass came proudly out of the cave. He had performed his part well and he knew it. He held his head up. His long ears were pricked forward with satisfaction. "Did you see how I made them run?" he said. "I did," said the lion. "And if I had not known you well and understood your nature, I should certainly have run from that noise myself." The lion said it pleasantly. He was not unkind, but the ass heard the truth in it, that what had frightened the goats was noise, not courage. The noise was the ass's gift, and a useful gift, but it was not the thing the ass was imagining it to be. The ass walked home quietly. In another part of the same forest, 3 bullocks lived together in a wide field. They were large and strong, and they kept close together. And because they kept close together, the lion had never been able to take any of them. He had circled the field many times, watching from the shadows, waiting for an opportunity that did not come. Whenever he came near, the 3 bullocks put their heads together, showing him 3 pairs of horns at once, and he retreated. This went on for a long time. The lion was patient. He had learned patience through the experience of being a lion. Patience was necessary when the prey was strong. Then one day a quarrel broke out among the bullocks. No one is certain now what the quarrel was about. It might have been about the best grass in the field, or about which corner of the field was most sheltered from the wind, or about something so small that neither the bullocks nor anyone else could clearly explain it afterward. The quarrel was real and the bullocks took it seriously, and they moved to opposite corners of the field and stood there with their backs to each other, as far apart as the field allowed. The lion watched from the shadows. He came out of the shadows quietly. He moved across the field without hurry. The 3 bullocks, separated and angry, each faced the lion alone when he came to them, one at a time, and alone each was manageable. The field that had been safe when the bullocks stood together was not safe anymore. The lion ate well that day. In the deep forest, far from the field of the bullocks, an eagle had her nest, high in the branches of a great tree. She was large and strong and magnificent in flight, and she ruled the sky above the forest in the way that the lion ruled the forest below. One morning a small hare came running to the tree at the base of the eagle's branch, its eyes wide with fear. Behind the hare came a fox. The hare pressed herself against the roots of the tree and looked up at the eagle, as if asking for help. The eagle, as it happened, needed no fox's assistance that morning. She was hungry. She spread her great wings and dropped from the branch and took the hare for herself. Sitting at the base of the tree was a beetle, a small beetle, unremarkable in every way, who had watched the hare come running and had watched the eagle ignore its appeal. The beetle was offended. She had made her home near the roots of that tree, and the eagle's disregard for the appeal of the helpless was, in the beetle's view, wrong. The eagle was the greatest bird in the sky. The beetle was small enough to overlook entirely, but the beetle did not consider this. She climbed, slowly and purposefully, to the eagle's nest, and rolled each of the eggs out of the nest, one by one, until there were none left. The eagle returned and found her nest empty and did not know what had happened. The next year, the eagle built her nest higher, on a mountain crag where she thought no small creature could reach. But the beetle climbed the mountain and found the nest and did the same thing again. In despair the eagle flew to the great god Jupiter himself and laid her eggs in his lap, where no small creature could touch them. But the beetle followed, buzzing about Jupiter's head until he rose and waved her away. And as he rose the eggs rolled from his lap and fell. Jupiter heard the beetle's complaints and understood her cause. He acknowledged that the eagle had acted wrongly, and he made a peace between them. They say that ever after, while the eagle's eggs lie in the nest in spring, the beetle sleeps in the earth below and does not disturb them. Even the smallest creature can find a way to respond to a wrong. Not always quickly, not always in the way that the powerful expect. But in a way, the lion settled into the shade of the afternoon. The forest was quiet. The bullocks were gone. The eagle circled on the thermal above the tree, and the beetle went about her business, very small and very certain of herself. In the roots of the world, there is another story about the lion and a mouse that belongs here, because it is perhaps the most famous story of the great and the small. A lion was sleeping in the forest when a mouse came running across his paw and woke him. The lion closed his great paw on the mouse. The mouse was very frightened. He asked the lion to let him go and promised that he would repay the kindness someday. The lion found this amusing. What could a mouse do for a lion? He was so amused that he opened his paw and let the mouse run. Some time later, the lion was caught in a hunter's net. He struggled against it and roared, but the net held him. The sound of the lion's distress carried through the forest. The mouse heard it and came. The mouse began to chew at the ropes of the net. He chewed quickly and with great patience, working at one strand and then another, until the net had enough holes in it that the lion could break free. The lion stood in the forest, looking at the mouse. The mouse who promised repayment had kept the promise. The lion, who had found the promise amusing, had lived to be grateful for it. Power protects itself easily and often. It is protected by others much more rarely. And sometimes the protector is the smallest creature in the forest, chewing at the ropes with its small teeth. No act of kindness is too small to matter, and no creature is too small to be useful. There is also the story of a lion, an ass, and a fox who went hunting together. They killed a great deal of game. The lion asked the ass to divide the spoils among them. The ass divided the game into 3 equal portions and invited the others to choose. The lion was not pleased with equal portions. He fell on the ass and killed him. Then he turned to the fox. "You divide it," said the lion. The fox put nearly everything into one great pile and left a very small portion for himself. "Where did you learn to divide so wisely?" said the lion, who was very pleased. "From the ass," said the fox. The fox had been paying attention. He had watched what happened to the ass, and he had understood it precisely, and he had acted on what he understood. This is the fox's gift. He does not need to be told twice. He reads the situation and responds to it with his whole intelligence. And he keeps his small portion and his life. The sun moved across the sky above the forest. The lion slept in the shade. The beetle worked in the earth. The fox moved through the trees on some quiet errand. Everything was as it should be in the great, ordinary, continuing life of the forest. The dog. Dogs have lived with human beings for longer than any other animal. The domestication of dogs is one of the oldest relationships in the human story. 10,000 years, perhaps more, in which the dog has been companion, worker, guardian, and in certain situations, dinner. The fables about dogs reflect this long familiarity. The dog in the old stories is not simply an animal. The dog is a partner, someone who has made an agreement with the human world and who is trying to live up to the agreement and sometimes failing. Dogs live in 2 worlds at once. They live in the world of their nature, the world of hunger and smell and the chase, and the pack, and they live in the world of their masters, the world of loyalty and training, and the careful earning of trust. The tension between these 2 worlds is where most of the dog stories come from. A dog had been trained to carry his master's dinner to him every day. The master worked at some distance from the house, and each noon the dog would take the basket in his mouth and walk the road between the house and the place where the master worked, with the food carefully carried. He was faithful in this duty. He carried the basket without tasting what was in it, though the smell of the food was very good, and his mouth was always wet with wanting it. He was proud of his faithfulness. He was a good dog. The other dogs in the neighborhood noticed him on his daily walk. They could smell what was in the basket. They knew what kind of dog he was: faithful, trained, not easily tempted, and they respected this. For a while, they left him alone. But the smell of food is patient, and the other dogs were always hungry. They began to test him. They would come alongside him on the road, sniffing at the basket, pressing him from the side. He walked faster. He held the basket higher. He arrived each day a little more flustered, a little less at ease, but still with the basket intact. Then one day all the dogs in the neighborhood gathered together and met him on the road. There was no space to go round them. They pressed in from every side. The dog stopped. He put the basket down. He meant to defend it. This was his mistake. The moment he stopped to argue, the moment he engaged with the crowd around him, he was lost. They were clever in the way of hungry animals. They made him feel foolish. They made him feel that the faithfulness he was so proud of was a kind of stupidity. They pressed their arguments and pressed their bodies against him. At last he seized a piece of the meat from the basket and ate it himself. "Very well," he said. "You divide the rest." He walked home without the dinner. The master waited in the field and went without his noon meal, and the dog who had been faithful for a long time found himself, at the end of that day, in a different place from the one he had always imagined himself in another house in the same town. A different dog had a different problem. This dog loved eggs. He had discovered them in the hen house and quickly learned to take them, swallowing them whole with great speed and pleasure. He grew expert at this. The hens were offended, but there was little they could do about it. The dog grew fat and happy and accustomed to eggs. One day the dog wandered down to the shore of the sea. He had never been to the sea before, and he found it large and various and interesting. On the wet sand, half hidden by a wave, he saw something round and smooth. He did not think. He was experienced with round things. Round things, in his experience, were eggs. He opened his mouth and took the round thing in a single swallow. It was an oyster, shell and all. The dog sat on the shore and thought about what he had done, as the oyster made its slow progress through him, and the pain grew from uncomfortable to considerable. "I have learned," he said eventually, in the quiet voice of someone who has paid for a lesson, "that not all round things are eggs." He walked home more carefully than he had walked down. There is also the dog in the manger. This is perhaps the most famous of the dog stories, and it is famous because it catches something exact about a particular kind of selfishness. A dog had fallen asleep in a manger, the feeding trough where the cattle came to eat. When the cattle came in from the field at the end of the day, hungry and tired from their work, they found the dog awake and growling at them, refusing to let them near the manger. The dog could not eat the hay. He was a dog. Hay was not his food and he wanted none of it. But he would not move from the manger and he would not let the cattle eat. He snarled and snapped as if the hay were the finest meat, as if some great treasure were being threatened. The cattle looked at him. "He cannot eat the hay," one said, "and yet he will not let us eat it. And we are hungry from the field." The farmer came in. He saw the situation at once. He seized a stick and drove the dog out of the stable with several blows that the dog, by his behavior, had invited. The dog stood outside the stable in the dark, nursing his injuries, listening to the cattle eat. There was also a dog who saw his reflection in a river, while carrying a large piece of meat in his mouth. The dog in the water appeared to have a piece of meat too. The meat in the water looked just as large as the meat in his mouth, and the dog decided he would have both pieces. He snapped at the reflection. The meat fell from his mouth into the river and was carried away by the current. He swam to the bank and sat there, wet and hungry, with nothing. He had given up what he had for the image of what he thought he saw. The image vanished the moment he reached for it. The actual meat was gone downstream. There is something in this that the dogs of the stories know about themselves, and that they cannot quite prevent. The hunger is real. The image of more is very convincing. The moment of snapping at the reflection is very brief, and then the meat is gone. A dog also tried, once, to steal a piece of meat from a butcher's stall. He ran away with it down the road, the butcher calling after him. The dog ran faster. He ran through the market and down the street and around the corner and into a lane and up a hill. He ran until he was sure he was alone. He put the meat down and looked at it. It was a good piece of meat. He had run well. He caught his breath. Then he heard behind him the sound of the butcher's apprentices, who had not stopped running either. He picked up the meat and ran again. But he was tiring now, and the apprentices were fresh. Sometimes the thing stolen is not worth the cost of keeping it. Sometimes what you get away with costs you more in the getting away than it would have cost to leave it alone. The dog ran all afternoon for a piece of meat he never ate. There is a story about a dog who lived near a manger full of hay. The manger belonged to the oxen who ate from it. The dog made his sleeping place in the manger and growled at the oxen whenever they came close. The oxen looked at the dog and looked at the hay. "He cannot eat the hay himself," said one ox. "He eats meat, but he will not let us eat it either." The dog would not move. He lay in the hay and growled, and the oxen had to go without their dinner. The dog in the manger has become a saying in many languages, a figure for the person who neither uses a thing themselves nor allows others to use it, who hoards what they cannot use, who blocks what they do not need, purely to keep it from others. It is a particular form of meanness, and the fable names it simply by showing it. The dog in the hay, growling, not eating, not allowing eating. The dog in the stories is not always this dog. The dog is also the faithful companion, the carrier of dinners, the creature who reflects on himself in the river. But the dog in the manger is one of the most lasting images in the collection, because what the dog represents is something recognizable from daily life. The person who will not use a thing and will not share it, who treats possession as sufficient reason for denial. The animals who gathered to hear these stories understood them through their own experience. Dogs know hunger. Dogs know the pull of faithfulness against desire. Dogs know what it is to stop to argue when they should have kept walking. But the people who told the stories recognized themselves in these dogs too. In the dog who let others talk him out of his duty. In the dog who ate without thinking. In the dog who hoarded what he could not use. These were human failings in dog shape, drawn large enough to see clearly. The fox. There is a figure in many of the world's folk traditions, the trickster, the clever outsider who wins by intelligence rather than strength, who observes the powerful without being fooled by them, who manages in a world not designed for his advantage. The fox in Aesop's stories is one of the earliest European versions of this figure. He appears again in the medieval French stories of Reynard the Fox, in the African-American tradition of Burr Fox, in Russian fairy tales, in Japanese folklore. The clever animal who wins by wit is a universal story, because the situation it describes is universal, the situation of someone who is not the most powerful creature in the room, but who has to survive in the room nonetheless. The fox is the cleverest animal in the old stories, not the strongest, not the most beautiful, not the most diligent, the cleverest. The fox wins through intelligence and cunning, and a precise reading of the situation he is in. He knows his weaknesses and works around them. He knows others' weaknesses and uses them. He's not always admirable, but he is always interesting. A fox fell into a well one day. It was not a deep well, but deep enough to be inconvenient. The fox was not badly hurt, but he could not get out again. He tried the sides of the well with his paws and found nothing to hold on to. He looked up at the circle of sky above him and considered his situation. He was in the well for a long time. The sun moved across the circle of sky above him. He grew thirsty. Then a goat came to the edge of the well and looked down. The goat had been looking for water. The goat was very thirsty, as goats get on a warm afternoon. "Is the water good?" called the goat. "The finest in the country," said the fox immediately. "Come down and try it. There is more than enough for both of us." The goat thought about this for a moment. The fox seemed to be in good spirits down in the well. The water must indeed be fine. The goat jumped in. The goat landed in the shallow water and drank. The fox, at the same moment, jumped on the goat's back, and from there to the tips of the goat's horns, and from the tips of the horns to the edge of the well and onto the grass above. He shook the water from his coat and smoothed his fur. The goat looked up from the well at the fox above. "What about me?" said the goat. "If you had as much sense as you have beard," said the fox pleasantly, as he turned toward the woods, "you would have made sure of a way out before you jumped in." The fox trotted away. The goat stood in the well and thought carefully about the choices that had led him there. On another evening, a wise old cock flew into a tree to roost as the sun was going down. He settled himself on a branch and was about to put his head under his wing when he saw, below him in the shadows, the figure of a fox. The fox looked up at the cock with bright eyes and a very agreeable expression. "Have you heard the wonderful news?" said the fox. "All the animals have agreed to live in peace together. The lion and the lamb, the fox and the hen. All of us, we have made a great agreement and we are friends now. Come down and let us embrace and celebrate." "How wonderful," said the cock, in a calm and pleasant voice. He was not at all calm inside. He was a cock and the cock knew the fox perfectly well. But he kept his voice warm and interested. "What is it you are looking at?" said the fox, after a moment. His voice had changed slightly. "I thought I saw some dogs coming along the path," said the cock. "They must have heard the news as well. They are coming to celebrate with us." There was no goodbye from the fox. He was simply gone, running through the underbrush with great speed, his tail streaming behind him. "Wait," called the cock after him. "If we are all friends now, the dogs are your friends too." But there was no answer. The fox was already far away. The cock settled his feathers and put his head under his wing and slept very comfortably. The fox also has a weakness, which is this. The fox who lives by his cleverness and by his reading of others sometimes assumes that he is the only clever one in the conversation. He forgets that others are watching him too, reading him, waiting for the moment when his own cleverness becomes predictable. The cock let the fox talk. He watched the fox's eyes, and then he gave the fox exactly the information, the coming dogs, that he knew would make the fox run. The cleverness ran both ways. In the late afternoon heat, a fox and a leopard lay resting after a good meal, talking the idle talk of animals who have nothing else to do. The leopard was proud of his coat, the beautiful spotted coat of tawny gold and dark rosettes, that made him one of the most striking animals in the forest. He said some dismissive things about the fox's coat, which was reddish-brown and ordinary by comparison. The fox looked at his coat and agreed that it was not the leopard's equal in beauty. But he kept talking, because the fox always keeps talking, and in the talking he made a point that the leopard had no immediate answer to. "A fine coat tells you something about what is on the outside," said the fox. "But a little more intelligence on the inside would serve you a great deal better in most situations." The leopard was not pleased with this, but the fox was already yawning and turning away, comfortable in his ordinary coat and his extraordinary mind. The fox knows his limitations. The fox has accepted that he is not the largest animal or the most beautiful. He works with what he has, a quick mind, a gift for reading situations, and the patience to wait for the moment when these advantages become decisive. This is not admirable in every way. The fox uses his cleverness for his own advantage and not always for others. But the patience and self-knowledge that the fox embodies are real virtues, worth understanding. The cock went to sleep in the tree. The goat stood in the well and thought. The fox moved through the forest, very quiet, very alert, already thinking about tomorrow. The fox had one more famous adventure, which is worth telling here. A fox was walking by a vineyard and saw grapes hanging from the vines. Large, ripe, beautiful grapes, deep purple in the late afternoon light. He tried to reach them. He jumped. He came short. He tried again and came short again. He tried several more times, with no success. The grapes were simply too high. The fox stood under the vines and looked at the grapes for a moment. "Those grapes are probably sour anyway," he said, and walked away. This is the shortest of the fox stories, and perhaps the most honest. The fox does not succeed. He does not outwit the vines. He cannot have what he wants, and he knows it. And so he tells himself a story about why what he cannot have is not worth having, and he moves on. The sour grape story is usually told as a fable about self-deception, and it is about that. But it is also about the fox's particular relationship with reality, his ability to adjust, to shrug, to keep moving. The fox did not sit under the vines and weep. He looked at the situation, made his assessment, told himself the story that helped him walk away, and walked away. He was wrong about the grapes, which were probably perfectly good, but he was right about the situation, which was that he could not have them. There is something almost admirable in this, and something almost dishonest, and most human beings who have ever wanted something they could not have done exactly what the fox did. The Fox and the Crow is another story from the same family. A crow had found a large piece of cheese and carried it up to a branch to eat in peace. A fox below saw the cheese and wanted it. The fox looked up at the crow. "What a beautiful bird," said the fox. "The finest feathers, the most elegant shape. Surely such a bird must have a voice to match. Would you not sing for me?" The crow was pleased by this. He opened his beak to sing. The cheese fell from his beak. The fox caught it and ran. Flattery is worth examining carefully when it comes from someone who wants something you have. The crow had been fine until he opened his mouth. The cheese was fine until he opened his mouth. The fox had not lied. Exactly. The crow was not an ugly bird, but the fox had used the truth about the crow's appearance to get the crow to do the thing the crow did not need to do, which was to sing. The crow, sitting on the branch without his cheese, was wiser than he had been before. He would not open his mouth at flattery again. But the cheese was gone. The fox moved through the evening forest, carrying the cheese, thinking of the next thing. There is always a next thing for the fox. The fox never quite rests. There is always another situation to read, another opportunity to assess, another piece of cheese somewhere in the world. The fox is hungry too, like the wolf, like the dog. But the fox's hunger is patient and intelligent, and it works around obstacles, rather than attacking them. And this is what gives the fox his particular place in the old stories. The wolf. In the old world of Greece and the Middle East from which the fables come, wolves were a real and daily presence. They circled the flocks at night. They came out of the hills in winter when game was scarce. The shepherd's main job, much of the time, was keeping the wolf away from the sheep. The wolf in the stories is not a fantastical creature or an abstract evil. The wolf is the neighbor you cannot trust. The wolf is the hunger that does not rest. In the modern world, wolves are in many places protected and admired. Magnificent animals, important parts of ecosystems that decline without them, creatures of great intelligence and social sophistication. All of this is true. But the wolf stories come from the shepherd's perspective, not the ecologist's. And from the shepherd's perspective, the wolf is the thing that eats the sheep. The wolf is the shadow in the old stories, where the fox is clever. The wolf is hungry, simply, directly, permanently hungry. And the hunger makes him do things that he knows are wrong and does anyway. He's the dangerous neighbor, the one who cannot finally be trusted no matter how reasonable he appears. His reasonableness is always in service of his hunger. A wolf had been watching a flock of sheep for a long time, circling the pasture at a careful distance, looking for an opportunity. The shepherd was watchful and the sheep stayed close together, and the wolf found no easy way in. Days passed. Weeks passed. The wolf was patient in the way that hunger teaches patience. He changed his approach. Instead of circling in the shadows with intent, he walked alongside the flock as if he were helping. He kept the strays in line. He moved gently, causing no disturbance. The shepherd watched him warily at first, but the wolf was careful and consistent and caused no trouble. And over time the shepherd's wariness faded. One day the shepherd needed to run an errand. He looked at the wolf, who had been so reliable, and left the flock in his care. When he came back, he found the flock diminished. Several sheep were gone. He knew then what his patience had cost him. He had forgotten what the wolf was under the reasonable behavior. The wolf had not forgotten. The wolf was never anything other than what the wolf had always been. In another pasture, an ass was grazing contentedly when he noticed a wolf lurking at the edge of the woods. The ass knew what this meant. He thought quickly. He began to walk with a limp. He hobbled painfully across the grass, his face twisted with discomfort. When the wolf came closer, the ass told him about the thorn in his foot. a sharp thorn. Very painful, dangerous if the wolf ate him without removing it first, as it might catch in the wolf's throat. The wolf saw the logic of this. He was a practical creature. He had no desire to choke. He bent over the ass's foot and began to search carefully among the hoof for the thorn. The ass kicked with all his might. The wolf flew backward, stunned, landing 10 feet away in the grass, while the wolf lay there, gathering himself. The ass galloped away at full speed and did not stop until he was well clear of the wood. The wolf, picking himself up slowly, rubbed his jaw. "I am a butcher," he said quietly, "not a doctor. I should have remembered that." He went back into the woods. A wolf had once been hungry near a village, and he came across a lamb drinking from a stream. The wolf wanted an excuse. He thought for a moment. "You are muddying my water," said the wolf, who was upstream from the lamb. The lamb looked at the stream. The water ran from the wolf's position down to the lamb's position. The lamb was drinking downstream. The water flowed one way only. "I am drinking below you," said the lamb. "I cannot muddy what comes from above." The wolf tried a different approach. "You said things against me last year." "Last year I was not born," said the lamb. "Then it was your father," said the wolf. And the wolf ate the lamb. This is one of the harder fables. The lamb argued well. The lamb argued correctly. The wolf's accusations were false and the lamb demonstrated clearly that they were false. But it did not help. The wolf was going to eat the lamb because the wolf was hungry. And no amount of correct arguments changed the fundamental situation. The powerful who intend a wrong will find a reason, or make one up. And the correctness of the defense is not always sufficient. The lamb was right. Being right was not enough. There is also the wolf who found a sheepskin. He had been having trouble getting enough to eat because the shepherds were vigilant, and the dogs were watchful and the sheep stayed close to each other. But one night, near the edge of the pasture, he found a sheepskin that had been discarded. The skin of a sheep that had died, left behind by someone who had no more use for it. The wolf put on the sheepskin. He was patient about it, working it over himself until it sat naturally, covering his grey wolf body with the white wool of the sheep. Then, in the morning, he walked into the pasture with the flock. The sheep did not notice. The dogs did not notice. The shepherd did not notice. The wolf walked among the flock all day, choosing his moment. That evening the shepherd decided he wanted lamb for supper. He went to the fold in the dim evening light and took the first animal his hands found, which was the wolf. The wolf had been too successful. He had been too convincing. He had gotten in and he had not gotten out in time. The evil that others plan for us sometimes turns back on us through circumstances we did not foresee. The wolf had planned well, but he had not planned for the shepherd's supper. The wolf in the old stories is not evil in the way of a villain who chooses wrongdoing. He is hungry. He is doing what he is made to do. But the stories treat his hunger as a kind of moral failing because his hunger makes him harm others, deceive others, take what belongs to others. He cannot help being hungry, but the stories hold him responsible for the methods he uses to satisfy his hunger. This is the wolf's dilemma, and it is also a human dilemma. Need does not excuse the methods used to meet it. The wolf knows this, in the way that the wolf in the stories always knows the moral of his own story. He grumbles his knowledge at the end. "I am a butcher, not a doctor," and returns to the woods. There was once a wolf who had a bone stuck in his throat. He was in great pain and could not eat. He went to every animal he knew and asked for help. No one was willing. They were afraid of the wolf, even in his weakness. They did not trust that a wolf with a bone in his throat was much less dangerous than a wolf without one. At last the wolf found a heron. Herons have long beaks, perfect for reaching into difficult places. He promised the heron a great reward if the heron would remove the bone. The heron thought carefully about this. The wolf's mouth was very close, and the heron's neck would be inside it. But the wolf seemed genuinely in pain. The heron agreed. She reached down the wolf's throat with her long beak and drew the bone out. She had done it. She asked for her reward. The wolf looked at her. "Your reward," said the wolf, is that you put your head into a wolf's mouth and got it out again with your life. Be satisfied with that. The heron flew away. She had learned something about contracts with wolves. The wolf had eaten, eventually. By the time the bone was out, he walked away hungry but no longer in pain. Beware of the promise made in distress by the one who makes promises poorly. When the distress passes, the promise may pass with it. There was a wolf who lived near a flock, and had never quite managed to eat his fill. One evening he sat near the edge of the flock and watched and thought. A young shepherd's dog came by. The dog was cheerful and energetic and proud of his work guarding the sheep. Your life is hard, said the wolf pleasantly. You work all day in all weather. And what do you get? A little food and a kennel. My life is my own. I sleep when I like and eat what I find and go where I choose. The dog listened to this with some interest. It is true that I work, said the dog. But what is that collar around your neck? And why is your neck bare in that ring? It looks like you have been chained. A small thing, said the wolf, looking away. I see, said the dog. You do not like to be caught and chained. And in between being caught, you have your freedom. I prefer the kennel and the work and the bone. The collar you wear is a different kind than mine. The dog went back to the flock. The wolf went back to the woods. Freedom and security are different goods. Both have costs. The wolf who envied the dog's food and warmth had not mentioned the chain. The dog who envied the wolf's freedom had not forgotten it. There is one more wolf story that belongs here. The story of the wolf and the shepherd. A wolf began to follow a flock of sheep but did no harm to them. He simply followed, day after day, keeping the same distance, never attacking. At first the shepherd was very watchful, driving the wolf away whenever it came close. But the wolf kept coming back and kept doing nothing harmful. And after weeks of this the shepherd relaxed. The wolf was just a wolf who followed. Perhaps it was not dangerous. After a while the shepherd had to be away from the flock for a day. He thought about what to do. The wolf had never attacked. The wolf had simply followed, patiently, without harm. He left the wolf with the flock. He came back in the evening. The flock was nearly gone. The wolf's patience had been longer than the shepherd's vigilance. The wolf had waited for exactly this, for the shepherd to stop watching, for the moment when the wolf's constancy would be mistaken for harmlessness. It was never harmlessness. It was strategy. Some patience is virtue. The tortoise's patience won the race. The beetle's patience outlasted the eagle. But the wolf's patience was also patience, of a different kind, for a different purpose. The fables do not say that patience is always virtue. They show the patience of the tortoise and the patience of the wolf side by side, and leave the listener to notice the difference. The difference is this. The tortoise's patience was applied to his own effort, to continuing when it was hard, to arriving where he intended to go. The wolf's patience was applied to waiting for someone else's mistake. These are not the same thing, though they look the same from the outside. The birds. Greece is a country of birds. The Mediterranean has long been one of the great migration routes of the world, and the Greeks watched birds carefully. They used the flight of birds for divination, the study of birds' direction and behavior as a way of reading the future. The augurs, the official readers of science, were often looking at birds. Particular birds were associated with particular gods. The owl with Athena, the eagle with Zeus, the peacock with Hera, the swallow with Aphrodite. This attention to birds gave the Greeks a detailed understanding of their behavior. The fables about birds are often accurate in specific ways. The heron's selectivity, the jackdaw's collecting habit, the crow's intelligence, the cock's alertness to danger. The ancient storytellers were watching real birds and drawing accurate conclusions about their natures. Birds live in the air, which the other animals cannot reach. This gives them a particular freedom, but it also gives them a particular vanity, the vanity of those who can see everything from above, and who mistake altitude for wisdom. A peacock and a crane met in a garden and fell into a comparison of their plumage, as birds will. The peacock had much to say about his feathers. He spread his tail in the sun. The great fan of iridescent green and blue, with its 100 watching eyes, magnificent and impossible. He let the crane look at it for a while. Then he said some dismissive things about the crane's feathers, which were grey and plain by comparison. The crane listened to all of this. He did not argue. When the peacock had finished, the crane spread his broad wings and flew. He flew upward in the easy spiral that great birds make, rising on the warm air, higher and higher, until he was far up in the blue sky above the garden. He called down from up there, "Follow me, if you can." The peacock stood in the garden among the other barnyard birds, his beautiful tail fanned out on the grass, unable to fly more than a few feet from the ground. A heron was standing in a shallow stream one morning, watching the water for fish. He was a particular heron, with standards. The water was full of fish, but he wanted only the finest, the best, the worthy. A small perch swam past. The heron ignored it. Too small. Another fish appeared, acceptable to most standards. The heron looked away. Not good enough. He stood in the stream as the morning passed. The fish that had been in the shallows moved into the cool depths as the sun rose. The heron was left with nothing. He was very glad, at last, to catch a tiny snail, the snail being the only thing that remained to him. There is a satisfaction in high standards, and there is also a cost. The heron went home with a snail. In a barnyard not far from the stream where the heron stood, a jackdaw had been watching the royal peacocks in the king's garden next door. The jackdaw was a small black bird with no particular distinction, and he knew it. The peacocks were everything he was not: large, colorful, trailing their extraordinary tails across the grass. One day the jackdaw found some peacock feathers that had fallen from the birds' tails. He took them carefully and stuck them among his own black plumes. He stood up straight and looked at himself. He was, he thought, transformed. He walked among the other jackdaws with his head held high, and they did not know what to make of him. He walked among the peacocks and they looked at him more closely, and they knew exactly what to make of him. They flew at him, plucking the borrowed feathers from his back, and some of his own black feathers with them, until he was naked and embarrassed. He flew back to the jackdaws. They drove him away too, remembering how he had treated them in his borrowed finery. The jackdaw sat alone in a bare tree and thought about his original feathers, which had been perfectly adequate for a jackdaw, and which he no longer quite had. A cock stood on a fence post one evening, as the sun went down, and crowed to announce it, as roosters do. It was a good evening. The colors in the west were fine and the air was cool and the crowing was satisfying. Then the cock saw a fox below the fence, looking up at him. The fox said that a great peace had been declared among all the animals. He invited the cock to come down and celebrate. The cock was afraid, but he was also intelligent. He looked very carefully at a point in the distance, as if something were coming along the road. "I see some dogs coming," said the cock. "They must have heard the news as well." The fox was gone before the cock had finished the sentence. The birds are often wiser than they seem. Their wisdom is different from the fox's wisdom. It is not calculation so much as alertness. Birds watch from high places. They see more than the creatures on the ground expect them to see. When the cock mentioned the dogs, he was not lying. He saw clearly what would happen when the words reached the fox's ears. He used the truth in the way that the fox usually uses cleverness. The crane flew over the garden and the heron stood in the stream, and the cock crowed from his fence post, and the evening light came down through the wings of the birds in the old world. There is a small fable about a dove and a crow. The dove was white and gentle and lived near the house and was fed by the people there. The crow was dark and rough-voiced and lived by his own effort. One day the crow said to the dove that the dove was not really free. She lived in the house's shadow, dependent on the people's goodwill. The dove considered this. "I am warm in winter," said the dove. "I am not hungry. When the hawk comes, the people notice. When the people decide to eat you," said the crow, "the people will eat you." The dove was quiet. "This is true," said the dove at last. "But the hawk is more likely than the meal, and the cold is more certain than the people's change of heart. I will stay." This is a practical calculation, not a statement about freedom. The dove is not saying that dependency is better than freedom. She is saying that her particular dependency has particular benefits that outweigh her particular risks, and that the crow's freedom has particular costs that the crow is not fully accounting for. Both of them are right about parts of what they see. Neither has the complete picture. The birds of the fables rarely have the complete picture. The heron refused the small fish and came home hungry. The jackdaw claimed 2 worlds and lost both. The peacock admired his tail and could not fly. The birds see clearly within their own field of vision and miss what is just outside it. The small creatures have their own perspective on the world. They live close to the ground, where the grain falls and the predators move and the roots of things are. They are prey. Most of their lives are organized around not being eaten. The intelligence of the mouse is the intelligence of vigilance, the intelligence that is always watching, always listening, always mapping the exits. The cleverness of the frog is the cleverness of camouflage and patience, and a sudden explosive motion that gets you from danger to safety if the timing is right. The fables about small creatures are often the most uncomfortable, because the small creatures do not usually win. The mouse drowns. The frog is carried off by the hawk. The frogs in the marsh are crushed by the bull's hooves. The small creatures suffer the consequences of the large creatures' choices, and the small creatures' own errors. The world is not designed for their comfort, but the small creatures also endure. They persist. They are numerous. Long after the individual mouse, who was tricked by the frog, has been eaten by the hawk, other mice are running along other riverbanks. The world of the small creatures is one of individual loss and collective survival. Mice and frogs and small things. The world looks different from the ground, from very close to it, from the grass roots and the dark places between stones. The small creatures know things that the large creatures miss, because the small creatures have always had to pay attention or die. A little mouse had never been out of his mother's hole. One day he went adventuring, just a short way, just to the corner of the yard. He came running back to tell his mother what he had seen. He had seen 2 strange creatures. One was beautiful, soft, with velvet fur and kind eyes and a long, gently waving tail. The other was terrible. Red wattles hanging from his face, tearing up the ground with his toes, making a shrieking noise that had nearly killed the mouse with fright. His mother looked at him steadily. "The beautiful creature," she said, "is a cat. He eats mice. The terrible one is a barnyard cock, who will not harm you at all. You must learn, my child, that appearances tell you very little about danger." The mouse sat with this for a long time. It was one of the most important lessons he would ever receive, and he had received it before he was old enough to forget it. A mouse, grown, hungry, and far from cautious, found a basket of corn. The opening was narrow, but he was determined, and he worked himself through it and ate until he was 3 times his original size. He was very full and very content. Then he tried to leave. He could not get through the narrow opening. He was too large. He sat in the basket and groaned. A weasel passed by and understood the situation immediately. "You ate too much," said the weasel. "You will have to wait until you are as thin as when you went in." This was perfectly correct and not at all helpful. The mouse sat in the basket and waited. He was thinner eventually. He learned the lesson. But he sat in the basket a long time first. In a pond lived a frog, old and green and comfortable in his mud. A young mouse came running along the bank one day, bright-eyed and eager to see the world. The frog called out from his lily pad and invited the mouse to visit. The mouse was interested but uncertain. He could not swim very well. "No matter," said the frog. He tied the mouse's leg to his own leg with a strand of reed, and they jumped into the pond together. The mouse soon wanted to go back to the bank. He called out and struggled, but the frog had other intentions. He pulled the mouse down under the water and drowned him. And then, before he could untie the reed, a hawk came sweeping over the pond and saw the mouse floating at the surface, and Devon seized it. The frog, tied to the mouse's leg, came up with the mouse and was carried off to feed the hawk's dinner. The mouse and the frog are both lessons in this story. The mouse for following too easily. The frog for the trap that caught the trapper. In a marsh at the edge of a field, where two great bulls were fighting, an old frog watched the combat with anxiety. A young frog asked him why he was afraid. The bulls were fighting over the meadow at the edge of the field. It had nothing to do with the marsh. The old frog explained. When the fighting was over, one bull would be the winner and one would be driven away from the meadow, and the bull who was driven away would come to the marsh, because the marsh was what remained to him, and the bull's great hooves would crush the frogs without noticing they were there. The young frog thought about this. He did not understand why the old frog worried about the disputes of the great, since the great had no interest in the small. But the old frog knew what the young frog had not yet learned, that when the great fall out, the small suffer for it, whether the great intend it or not. The bull came to the marsh. The frogs were crushed. The old frog had been right, and being right did not help him. A rabbit went out one morning for a meal of clover and forgot to latch the door of his burrow. When he came back, a weasel's nose was sticking out of the doorway. The rabbit was indignant. The weasel was settled. They argued. A large old cat came along and offered to mediate. "Come close," said the cat, who was very old and claimed to be very deaf. "Put your mouths close to my ears and tell me everything." The rabbit and the weasel leaned in to explain their sides of the dispute. The cat had them both under her paws before either had finished the first sentence. The dispute was settled, in a manner of speaking. The small creatures learned that when the powerful offer to mediate, the mediation is for the powerful's benefit. The mouse learned to watch what he ate. The frog learned, too late, that the trap closes on both sides. The rabbit learned to latch his door. These are small lessons, hard won by small creatures who live in a world where most things are larger and stronger than they are. A young mouse had heard about cats. Every mouse has heard about cats. The danger was known in the abstract. But the mouse had a plan. He had observed that, when a cat approached the mouse holes in the walls of the house, the mice heard nothing until it was too late. If only the cat wore something that made a noise, a bell, say, tied around its neck, the mice would always have warning. He brought this proposal to the mouse council. The older mice listened carefully. It was a fine plan. The young mouse was praised for his cleverness. The mice voted in favor of the bell. Then an old mouse in the corner asked the question, "Who will bell the cat?" The room was quiet. No mouse spoke. The young mouse who had proposed the plan looked at the floor. The other mice looked at each other. The meeting adjourned. The bell was never tied. The cat continued as before, silent and terrible, and the mice continued to run when they heard the cat coming, which was usually just barely in time. Good plans require someone willing to execute them. The cleverness of the plan and the bravery required to act on it are different things. The mice understood the plan. They lacked the bravery. But the plan without the bravery was just an idea in a room. A man had a problem with some rats in his cellar. A cat came to his door and offered to solve the problem. The cat went to the cellar and was very successful. He caught rat after rat, and the man was very pleased with him. After a while, the cellar was quiet. The rats were gone. The cat, finding no more rats, began to catch the mice, then the man's chickens, then other things in the yard that were not, strictly speaking, rats or pests at all. The man had hired a pest controller and been given a cat. These were not the same thing. The cat's nature did not change when the original task was complete. The cat simply moved on to the next available prey. When you need a specific service, be very clear about what the service is and what happens when it ends. The cat in the cellar was perfectly doing what cats do. The problem was the assumption that what cats do is the same as what the man needed done. A cat had heard that the birds in a certain tree were ill. He dressed himself as a doctor, a coat, a bag of medicine, spectacles on his nose, and went to call on the birds professionally. "Tweet," said the birds from the safety of the branches. "We see what you are. We will be quite well enough, thank you, if you stay away." The cat went home without his dinner. Be wise and beware of those who offer help with too much enthusiasm when the help they offer is exactly what their nature would lead them to offer anyway. A lion grew old and could not hunt as he once had. He lay in his den and pretended to be very ill. The other animals came to visit him, concerned for the great lion's health. As they entered the den, one by one, the lion ate them. A fox came to the entrance of the den. He looked carefully at the ground in front of it. Many footprints in the earth, all pointing inward, none pointing out. "I see many tracks going in," said the fox, "and none coming out. I will wish you well from here." He turned and walked away. All the footsteps in the world tell you about where they have been. The fox who reads the ground reads a truer story than the lion's performance of illness. There is a bat who appears in several of the old stories. The bat is a useful figure because the bat lives in two worlds at once. It flies like a bird, but is also a mammal. And when the birds and the animals have their disputes, the bat tries to be on whichever side seems to be winning. In the battle between the birds and the animals, the bat went to the birds when the birds were winning and said he was a bird. Did he not fly? He went to the animals when the animals were winning and said he was an animal. Did he not nurse his young? He was welcome nowhere and was driven from both camps when the truth of his switching became clear. There are creatures who try to belong to every group by commitment to none. The bat is not condemned by the story. He was doing the sensible thing. In a world where belonging to the wrong side had serious consequences. But the story notes the result. He lives in the dark between the walls, flying out only at night, belonging fully to neither world. The mice and the frogs and the bats of the small stories know things the large animals do not. They know how to survive in the margins. They know how to read the room, which side is winning, when to move and when to stay still. They are not always admirable, but they are persistent, which is its own kind of virtue in a world that is mostly larger and more powerful than they are. The goose who laid golden eggs. There is a category of fable that is about good fortune, about what happens when good fortune arrives in a life that is not prepared for it. The goose who laid golden eggs, the woodman and Mercury's exes, the countryman who found treasure by accident. These are stories about the relationship between luck and wisdom, about whether the person who receives an unexpected gift is capable of keeping it. The answer in the fables is often no. Good fortune arrives and is immediately undermined by the same qualities that had kept it away in the first place: impatience, greed, dishonesty, the inability to trust what is actually working. The goose is fine. She is laying golden eggs reliably. The problem is not the goose. The problem is the man who cannot accept reliable as enough. There was once a countryman who had a goose that laid a golden egg every morning. Not a pretend golden egg, or an egg colored to look golden. An actual golden egg, heavy and gleaming, solid gold through and through. The countryman took the eggs to market, and they made him rich by any reasonable standard. He had more money than he had ever had. He had more than he needed. But more than you need and enough are different things in the mind. The countryman had enough. He did not feel that he had enough. He watched the goose lay her egg each morning and thought about all the eggs that were still inside her, all the gold that was not yet in his pocket. And the thought grew and grew. One day the thought became an action. He killed the goose. He found nothing inside her that was worth anything at all. The goose was dead. The eggs were gone. He had exchanged something that produced gold reliably for an afternoon's impulsiveness and an empty nest. He stood in the yard looking at what he had done. The yard was quiet in a new way. In a frozen field in winter, a farmer walked his land early in the morning and found a snake lying still in the cold, stiff and nearly dead. The farmer knew about snakes. He knew their nature. He had seen what snakes could do. And yet he picked the snake up and put it inside his coat, against his warm body, to revive it. The snake woke gradually. The warmth the farmer offered, it was real warmth, freely given. But a snake is a snake. And when the snake had enough strength, it bit the man who had been so kind to it. The bite was deadly. The farmer said, as the darkness came, "Learn from my fate not to take pity on a scoundrel." He was right. But he had known the snake's nature before he put it in his coat. The lesson was not really about snakes. It was about the impulse of kindness that ignores what it knows in favor of what it hopes. The impulse that says perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps this creature will respond to kindness with something other than its own nature. The impulse is generous. It does not always survive contact with the world. The sick stag had come to rest in a quiet clearing in the woods. He had just enough strength to gather food nearby and lie down in the dappled light, and wait for his strength to return. The other animals of the forest heard about the stag's illness and came to visit, and to wish him well. This was kind of them, but they were also hungry, in the way that animals are always hungry, and they helped themselves, while visiting, to the food the stag had gathered. They ate a little here and a little there, each one not very much, but there were many visitors and the food was not replaced. The stag starved before his strength could return. The visitors had meant him no particular harm. Each had taken only a little, but goodwill that consumes what it intends to help is not goodwill that helps. The goose's golden eggs are gone. The snake's victim is dead. The stag's food is eaten by his friends. These are stories about the gap between intention and consequence, about the countryman who intended to get richer and got nothing, the farmer who intended to be kind and was killed for it, the visitors who intended to be friendly and ate the stag's food. There was a man who was very wealthy and who was very worried about losing his wealth. He converted all his gold into a large lump of solid gold and buried it in the ground, at the edge of his field. Every day he went to look at it. Every day he dug it up and looked at it and put it back and covered it again. This was his treasure. He looked at it daily and was comforted. A neighbor noticed his habits and dug up the gold one night and took it away. When the man went to look at his treasure and found the hole empty, he wept and beat his chest and made such a noise of grief that his neighbors gathered around him. One of the neighbors, when he heard the story, said, "You never spent the gold anyway. You only looked at it. Take a stone and bury it where the gold was and look at it every day. It will serve you exactly as well. The gold that serves no purpose has no value. A treasure that is hoarded and never used is not a treasure. It is an anxiety buried in the ground." There was a crow who was very thirsty one hot summer day. She found a pitcher of water, but the water level was very low. Too low for her to reach with her beak. She tried pushing the pitcher. She tried tilting it. She could not get to the water. Then she began to drop pebbles into the pitcher. One at a time, she carried pebbles from the ground and dropped them in. 1 pebble, 2, 3. Slowly, as the pebbles accumulated at the bottom, the water level rose. She dropped in more pebbles, more, until finally the water was high enough to reach, and she drank. Patience and ingenuity together accomplish what neither would alone. The crow could not move the pitcher. She could not reach the water directly, but she could move pebbles, one at a time, and the pebbles changed the situation until the situation was manageable. This is one of the most beautiful of the fables. The crow's solution is so simple and so unexpected and so effective. It requires patience, many small actions, none of which produces the result, but which together change the conditions. It requires paying attention to what you can actually do, rather than fixating on what you cannot. The gap is always there. What we intend and what we cause are not the same thing, but what we can do, patient and persistent, pebble by pebble, is often more than we think. The stories hold these two things together and ask us to look at both. A woman had a hen that laid 1 egg each day. The woman was satisfied with this for a long time, but as time went on she began to wonder whether the hen might, if fed differently, lay 2 eggs a day. She tried feeding the hen more. The hen grew fat. It stopped laying eggs. The greed in this story is mild. It is not dramatic greed. It is the modest, everyday greed of wanting a little more than you have, of looking at what is working and wondering whether it could work better, faster, more often. The wanting is understandable, but the hen lays 1 egg a day because that is the pace at which the hen produces eggs, and the attempt to accelerate the pace by feeding the hen more does not produce more eggs. It produces a fat hen and no eggs. We encounter this logic in many forms. The goose killed for the gold inside her had no gold inside her. The hen fed for 2 eggs a day produced no eggs. The man with the 2 wives ended bald. The changes made in search of more produce nothing, or produce less than the original. And the original cannot always be restored. This is one of the lessons that is difficult to hear, because the wanting more is so natural. The farmer who digs in the soil every morning and gets 1 good crop per year could perhaps, if he worked harder, get 2. Or perhaps the soil only produces 1, and harder working produces exhaustion and the same crop. The fables do not say effort is futile. They say that certain kinds of acceleration apply to things that have their own pace. Do not produce more of what you want. They produce disruption of what you had. The farmer and his sons. The farmer is one of the central figures of the fable world. The farmer is the person who lives most directly in relationship with the natural order, with the seasons and the rain and the soil and the animals. The farmer cannot afford to deceive himself about what works and what does not. The crop does not grow because you wanted it to. The harvest does not come because you hoped for it. The field responds to what is actually done to it, not to what was intended. This makes the farmer, in the fables, a figure of practical wisdom. Not always correct, not always wise, but tested against reality in ways that provide real feedback. The farmer who learns from the cranes learns because the cranes are eating his actual grain, and the empty threats are producing actual losses. The farmer's sons who learn from the digging learn because the actual harvest is better, and the actual profit is larger. The fables about farmers are often about the relationship between effort and result, between intention and consequence, between what we plan and what the earth actually gives us. A rich old farmer was dying. He called his sons to his bedside. There were several of them, strong young men who had been arguing for years about the inheritance and who had not always worked together well. The old farmer said, "Somewhere on this land there is a treasure." He did not know exactly where, but the treasure was there, and they would find it if they searched every inch of the land. Then he died. The sons searched the land. They turned over every foot of it with their spades. They dug in the corners and along the walls and under the trees and across the middle of every field. They dug deep. They dug twice. They found no chest of gold, no buried silver, nothing that matched their expectation of a treasure. But the digging had loosened the soil and aerated it and broken up the clods. The harvest that year was extraordinary, far better than any of the sons had seen in their years on the farm. The yield was the finest in the district. They understood then what their father had told them. The treasure was in the labor. The land work became the treasure. Their father had left them exactly what he had promised, a hidden treasure. And it had been hidden in their own effort all along. A farmer near a large planted field had a problem with cranes. The cranes came to his field whenever he planted and ate the seeds as fast as he put them in. He came to the field with his sling to frighten them away, but he was careful with his stones. He swung the sling and shouted without loading it, hoping the noise and the threat would be enough. At first the cranes flew away in great alarm, but cranes are observant birds. They noticed that nothing struck them. They noticed that the noise that followed the sling swinging was words and not stones. Words could not hurt a crane. They began to ignore him, eating the seeds calmly while the farmer shouted and swung his empty sling. The farmer recognized what had happened. He loaded his sling with stones. The next time he came to the field, he was silent, but the stones were real. Several cranes were killed. The rest did not return. The lesson that a threat must be real to be respected is older than the fables, but the fables say it with particular clarity. An empty sling is worse than no sling at all, because it teaches the cranes that the sling is empty. A goatherd brought his flock into a cave during a cold storm. Inside the cave he found a number of wild goats, who had also taken shelter there. He was interested in the wild goats. If he could add them to his flock, he would have more animals. So he fed the wild goats well, better than his own flock, who got only enough to keep them alive. When the storm passed and the cave was open, the wild goats bolted for the hills. "Is that my thanks?" said the goatherd. "We know how you treated your own flock. said one of the wild goats from the hillside. "While you were trying to impress us, we know exactly how you would treat us once you had us." The goat that stood in the entrance of the cave and watched them go, his own flock, thin and undeveloped, waited patiently behind him. He had tried to buy the future with the present. He had paid for the future goats by shortchanging the present ones. The wild goats saw the accounting clearly. A farmer had a horse and a donkey who traveled the road together. The donkey's pack was very heavy. He asked the horse to take some of the load. The horse said no. He was a horse, not a donkey. He did not carry loads. The donkey carried his load all day and collapsed near the end of the journey. The farmer, seeing that the donkey could go no further, shifted all of the donkey's load onto the horse and the dead donkey on top of it. The horse carried the full load and the dead donkey both to the end of the journey. If he had helped the donkey when the donkey asked, he would have carried half as much. His refusal cost him more than his help would have. This is simple arithmetic, and the horse could not do it, or would not. The horse thought helping was beneath him. The math disagreed. A countryman owned a field that was full of weeds. He was not a particularly hard-working man. He had let the weeds take over and now stood at the edge of the field, looking at it, wishing it were already cleared. He prayed to Jupiter to clear it for him. Jupiter's answer, when it came, was not what he had asked for. Jupiter told him to first plough the field, and then the field would be cleared. The countryman had wanted the result without the work. Jupiter had offered the work that would produce the result. They were not the same thing. The countryman went home and thought about this for a while and eventually picked up his plough. The gods help those who help themselves. This maxim is so old that it precedes the stories, and so obvious that it needs the stories to make it worth saying. The farmer's sons turned up treasure in the field. The cranes learned when the sling was real. The wild goats knew better than to trust what the goat had showed them. The horse learned, too late, the arithmetic of helping. These are stories about work and honesty and the long view, about what is really valuable, about what threats are really real, about how actions reveal what words might hide. Vanity. Vanity is not the same as pride. Pride, in the old tradition, is a complex thing. It can be the reasonable appreciation of one's genuine qualities, or the distorted inflation of those qualities into something they are not. Vanity is simpler than pride. Vanity is the confusion of appearance with substance, of how you look with what you are, of the opinion others have of you with the truth of yourself. The fables about vanity are gentle rather than harsh. The mule, the jackdaw, the peacock, the monkey, none of them are condemned as wicked. They are simply shown, clearly, the gap between what they imagine and what is. The mule's good feeling about himself lasts until the work begins. The jackdaw's borrowed splendor lasts until the peacocks look closely. The showing of the gap is enough. The fable does not need to insist on the lesson. The lesson is in the action. A mule had been well fed and rested for some weeks, and found himself feeling very vigorous and pleased with himself. He walked with a high step. He held his head up. He thought about his ancestry. "My father," he said, "was certainly a full-blooded racing horse. I feel this in my blood. I feel it in my step." The next day the mule was put back in harness and worked hard from morning to evening. He came home that night very sore and very tired and not at all vigorous. "I was mistaken," he said quietly. "My father was an ass after all." The mule's vanity had lasted exactly as long as his rest. When the work resumed, so did his actual nature. There is no dishonesty in not knowing your own limitations, but there is something worth noticing in the speed with which the vigorous rest became a claim about bloodlines. A monkey, on a voyage by sea, was very pleased with himself. He sat in the ship as if he were a person of consequence. When a storm wrecked the ship, a dolphin saw the monkey struggling in the water and took him on his back to carry him to shore, thinking he was a man, for the dolphins were very friendly to men in those days, and especially to Athenians. The dolphin asked the monkey if he was a citizen of Athens. "Yes," said the monkey, drawing himself up, "one of the best families. And you know Piraeus, the port. asked the dolphin. Very well, said the monkey. Piraeus is my closest friend. Piraeus is not a person. Piraeus is a harbor. The dolphin knew this. The dolphin turned his head and saw what was on his back. And without another word he dove into the sea and left the monkey to manage as best he could. The monkey had lied easily and without particular thought. The way vain creatures lie, not to deceive but to perform, to be seen as more than they are. The dolphin, who valued honesty more than the monkey understood, responded accordingly. A jackdaw watched the peacocks in the royal garden with envy, that grew over the course of several weeks into a plan. He gathered the fallen feathers of the peacocks and arranged them among his own black plumes, and presented himself, in this borrowed magnificence, among the peacocks. The peacocks looked at him for a moment. Then they plucked away the borrowed feathers, and some of his own along with them, and drove him off. He returned to the jackdaws. He had treated them with contempt in his brief magnificence, and they drove him off too. He sat alone. He had managed, through vanity, to lose both worlds. The peacock world he could not enter, and the jackdaw world he could not now return to. He had his own feathers, or most of them. He had the lesson. The peacock himself is perhaps the best emblem of vanity in the old stories, not because the peacock is wrong about his feathers, which are genuinely extraordinary, but because he believes that the feathers are the most important thing, that their beauty is the highest virtue, that the crane who flies high must envy the peacock who merely walks beautifully on the ground. The crane, who does not argue, simply flies. The useful is worth more than the ornamental, but the ornamental does not easily believe this, because the ornamental is accustomed to being admired. The peacock's beauty is real. The crane does not deny it. She simply goes where she needs to go, which is high up, where the peacock cannot follow. A fox once saw some grapes hanging from a vine over a high wall. The grapes were full and dark, and the fox wanted them very much. He ran and jumped. He could not reach them. He ran and jumped again. He still could not reach them. He tried from different angles and with different approaches. He could not reach the grapes. He walked away. They were probably sour anyway, said the fox. This is one of the most honest of the fables, because it shows not the vanity of claiming to be more than you are, but the vanity of refusing to admit that you wanted something and could not have it. The fox does not say, "I did not want those grapes." He says, "Those grapes were not worth wanting." He protects himself with a judgment about the thing he could not reach, converting his failure into a preference. It is a very human defense. It is the defense of someone who cannot bear to feel small. The grapes were probably fine. The fox knows the grapes were probably fine. The fable knows that he knows. A fox fell into a well and could not get out. After a while a goat came to the edge of the well and looked down. "Is the water good?" asked the goat. "Excellent," said the fox. "Come down and taste it." The goat jumped in. The fox immediately jumped onto the goat's back and from there to the edge of the well, and climbed out. He looked back down at the goat. "You should have thought about how you were going to get out before you jumped in," said the fox. The goat was in the well. The fox was out of it. The fox had been honest about the arithmetic of the situation, if dishonest about everything else. The lesson the goat needed was a lesson about looking before leaping, but the fox could not give honest lessons, because the fox was the kind of creature who sees opportunities rather than lessons. An eagle was soaring high above the mountains when he spotted a lamb far below on the slope. He folded his wings and dropped from the sky in the great plunging dive that eagles make, seized the lamb, and flew away. A jackdaw saw this from a nearby branch. The jackdaw was much smaller than the eagle and had never caught anything larger than a beetle. But the eagle had made it look very easy, and the jackdaw was impressed with himself, in the way that small birds sometimes become. He spread his wings and fell toward a large ram on the hillside below. He landed on the ram's back. His claws were small and the ram's wool was thick, and the jackdaw found himself entangled. He beat his wings and pulled at his feet and could not free himself. He was still there when the shepherd came and found him. The shepherd looked at the small black bird struggling in the ram's wool. "You thought you were an eagle," said the shepherd, and untangled the jackdaw and clipped his wings and gave him to his children to play with. Do not attempt what is beyond your nature. The eagle's dive is the eagle's. The jackdaw who tries the eagle's dive is a jackdaw who ends in a child's cage. There is no shame in being a jackdaw. The shame is in not knowing that you are one. An eagle and a crow were arguing one day about who was the stronger. The eagle was magnificent, the greatest of birds, and he was quite sure he knew the answer. The crow was small and black and clever. He proposed that they settle the argument by each trying to fly the highest. The eagle launched himself upward in the easy, powerful spiral of his kind and rose until he was a speck against the sky, higher than any other bird could go. He called down to the crow, triumphant. What he did not see was the crow riding on his back. The crow had landed quietly on the eagle's back as he rose, hidden among the great feathers, riding the eagle's power upward. When the eagle finished his climb, the crow stepped off and flapped upward a few lengths more and called back down. I am higher. The eagle was furious. But it was technically true. The crow had gone higher. This is not a story about the crow winning. It is a story about the difference between power and intelligence, and about the kind of intelligence that knows when to ride and when to fly on its own. The birds of the old stories are as complicated as the four-footed animals. The eagle is powerful and sometimes arrogant. The crow is clever and sometimes dishonest. The peacock is beautiful and sometimes foolish. The heron is particular and sometimes goes hungry. Each bird is exactly itself, and each bird's virtues and faults are the same thing, the same quality. That makes them distinctive is the quality that sometimes defeats them. There was a dove who saw a wasp fall into the water below the branch where she sat. The dove pulled a leaf from the tree and let it fall to the water, and the wasp crawled onto the leaf and was saved. She flew away. The dove went about her business. Some time later, a man with a bow was aiming at the dove. The wasp, who was nearby, saw what was about to happen. She flew and stung the man sharply on his hand, just as he released the arrow. The arrow went wide. The dove flew away. One good turn deserves another. The dove saved the wasp from the water without expecting anything in return. The wasp saved the dove from the arrow without being asked. The account between them was settled without either party having intended to open it. A swallow and a sparrow were debating where to build their nests. The swallow proposed the roof of a courthouse where trials were held. Not there, said the sparrow. The sounds that come from that place are of people in pain and dispute. The sounds will disturb the nest and no young bird will grow properly in such a place. The swallow built her nest on the courthouse roof. The sparrow built elsewhere. The young swallows grew up hearing nothing but argument and accusation and the sounds of judgment. They grew up believing that this was the sound of the world, that every relationship was a dispute, that every question was a matter of who was wrong and who was right, and what the punishment should be. The sparrows young grew up hearing the wind in the grass and the sounds of ordinary things. They knew the world was wider than a courthouse. Not every story of the birds is about pride or cleverness. Some are about the environment in which a young creature grows, and what that environment teaches by the mere fact of being present. The sounds we hear most consistently become the sounds we expect from the world. A young swallow said, when she was old enough to say anything, "The world is full of argument." The sparrow flying past said, "Come and see the river." The swallow came and saw the river. She was quiet for a long time. "I did not know it was like this," she said. "You are not listening," said the sparrow, "to the right sounds. Trust and its limits." Trust is one of the central preoccupations of the fable tradition. The fables are full of misplaced trust. The shepherd who trusts the wolf, the earthen pot who trusts the brass pot, the lamb who trusts the judge, the crow who trusts the flattering fox. The fables are also full of trust rightly placed, the woodman who trusts that honesty will be rewarded, the lion who trusts the mouse enough to let him go, the tortoise who trusts in his own steady walking. The fables do not say that trust is always wrong or always right. They show the conditions under which it is appropriate and the conditions under which it is fatal. The trust that is placed without evidence, without attention to the evidence that is available, without reading the tracks at the entrance to the den. This trust is the trust that costs the trusting party everything. The trust that is earned slowly, through consistency and evidence, and placed carefully. This trust is another thing entirely. The world of the fables is not a world without trust. It is a world in which trust requires judgment. There was once a man who was very kind to his neighbors and gave freely of what he had. When he died, his neighbors mourned him, but at the reading of his will, they discovered that he had left everything he owned to a stranger, a man none of them knew, who had done the dead man a great service many years earlier, when the dead man had been in desperate need and none of his neighbors had helped him. The neighbors were offended. They had always been kind to the man. They had been good neighbors. Yes, said the stranger, who had come a long way to receive the inheritance. You were kind when kindness cost you nothing. He remembered the one who helped him when helping was difficult. This is not strictly a fable from the Aesop tradition, but it belongs here because it says something that all the Aesop fables about trust are pointing toward. The trust that matters is the trust that is honored when honoring it is inconvenient. The woodman was honest when honest would have been very easy to pretend to. The goat was kind when the wild goats did not need to be there, and when the kindness was a performance rather than a reality. The friend in the tree was cowardly when the moment required courage. The moment of testing is when trust reveals what it is. There is a story about a lion who had grown old and could no longer hunt. He lay down in his cave and let it be known throughout the forest that he was sick, and that any animals who came to visit him would be welcome. He received his visitors one by one. The fox came to the entrance of the cave and stopped there. Come in, said the lion. I am not well. I welcome company. I see many tracks going into your cave, said the fox from the entrance. I see no tracks coming out. The fox went away. The lion had no fox dinner that day. The tracks at the entrance are evidence. The fox reads them and acts on what they say. The animals who went in and did not come out had not read the tracks, or had read them, and told themselves a story about why the tracks meant something else, or had been too polite to refuse the sick lion's invitation. Polite is sometimes the wrong choice. The fox was not polite. The fox was alive. There is a related story about a lion who was old and weak and was visited by all the animals who had ever feared him, each of them taking the opportunity to insult him now that he was no longer dangerous. The bull rushed at him with tusks. The bull gored him. The ass, who had been kicked by the lion many years before, came and kicked him with both heels. The lion endured all of this. This is the bitterest part of dying, he said. Not death itself, but this. This is a story about dignity in weakness, and about the small-mindedness of the powerful, who become brave only when the danger is gone. The ass who kicks the dying lion is brave in the most worthless sense of the word. He is brave after the fact, brave against what cannot hurt him, brave in the way that costs nothing and proves nothing. These are the limits of trust. The lion trusted that his kingdom would protect him. The dying lion discovered that what he had was not a kingdom but an arrangement based on fear. When the fear went, the arrangement went with it. A brass pot and an earthen pot stood together on the hearthstone. One day the brass pot proposed that they go out together into the world. The earthen pot hesitated. He was fragile. The world was full of hard things. The brass pot said he would take care of the earthen pot. He would put himself between the earthen pot and anything that might hurt him. The earthen pot agreed. Off they went, side by side, jolting along on their 3 stubby legs. They bumped into each other at every step. The brass pot was solid and could take the bumping without harm. The earthen pot was not solid and could not. After 10 paces the earthen pot cracked. At the next bump he shattered. The brass pot had meant to protect him. The brass pot had genuinely believed that his company was good for the earthen pot. But the brass pot's company was what killed him. The bumping that the brass pot survived easily was fatal to the earthen pot's different nature. Equals make the best friends. Those who are very different in strength or fragility or nature cannot always travel well together, however good the intentions. Two men who were great friends set out together on a journey through a forest. They had been friends for many years and trusted each other completely. They walked through the forest talking of various things. Then they saw a bear coming through the trees toward them. One of the men, very quickly, climbed the nearest tree and hid in the branches. The other man could not climb. He thought quickly. He had heard that bears do not eat the dead. He fell to the ground and lay perfectly still, holding his breath, his eyes closed, every muscle as relaxed as he could manage. The bear came to him and sniffed around him for a long time. The man lay still. The bear put its nose very close to the man's ear and seemed to be saying something. Then the bear walked away into the forest. The man in the tree came down. He was very cheerful. "What did the bear say to you?" he asked his companion. "He told me not to travel with a friend who runs away when the danger comes." This is a fable about the kind of friendship that reveals itself under pressure. The friend in the tree had meant no particular harm. He had simply done what self-interest required in the moment. But the man on the ground had learned, in the most direct way possible, what kind of friend he had. A bundle of sticks was brought before a father who was dying and wished to teach his quarreling sons a final lesson. He asked the eldest to break the bundle. The eldest tried and could not. He asked each son in turn. None could break the bundle. The father took the bundle apart and handed each son a single stick. "Break these," he said. Each stick broke easily in each son's hands. "Alone," said the father, "you are like single sticks. Together, you are like the bundle. In unity is strength." The bull and the lion showed us this from the animal's side. The bundle of sticks shows it from the human side. The same truth, told twice, in different shapes, to be sure of it. A bear went roaming through the woods one day in search of berries. He found a fallen log where a swarm of bees had made their hive and stored their honey. He nosed around the log carefully, testing the air, finding the smell of the honey very interesting. One bee, returning to the hive from the clover field, saw the bear and stung him once, sharply, and disappeared into the log. The bear lost his temper immediately. He was large and strong and the sting had been small, but the affront of it, the presumption of the small bee, was more than he could manage. He attacked the log with his full strength, tearing at it with tooth and claw. The entire swarm came out. The bear ran. He ran through the woods and dove into the nearest pond and stayed under the water, as long as he could manage, coming up for air and going back under. While the swarm circled the surface of the pond, he emerged eventually, covered in stings, and thought about the single sting that had cost him all of this. It is wiser to accept a single injury quietly than to respond with rage and invite 1,000 injuries in return. A woodman was cutting trees near a deep pool in the forest at the end of a long day. He was tired and his strokes were not as careful as they had been in the morning. The axe slipped and flew from his hands into the pool. The pool was deep and dark and the axe was gone. The woodman was in despair. The axe was his livelihood. He had no money to replace it. He sat by the edge of the pool and wept. The god Mercury appeared. Mercury asked what was wrong. The woodman told him. Mercury dove into the pool and came up with a golden axe. "Is this yours?" asked Mercury. "No," said the woodman. "That is not mine." Mercury dove again and came up with a silver axe. "Is this yours?" "No," said the woodman. "Mine was plain, with a wooden handle." Mercury dove a third time and came up with the woodman's own axe. The woodman was very glad. Mercury, pleased with the woodman's honesty, gave him all 3 axes, the golden and the silver and his own. The story traveled through the village. Other woodmen heard it. They went into the forest, each of them, and hid their axes in the bushes and pretended they had lost them in the pool, and wept at the edge of the water. Mercury appeared to each of them, as he had appeared to the honest woodman. He showed each of them a golden axe and each of them claimed it as their own. Eagerly, Mercury gave each of them a knock over the head with the golden axe and sent them home. When they came back the next day for their own axes, the axes could not be found. The trust that the woodman had with the god was built on honesty. It could not be copied, because what was being copied was the appearance of honesty. And the god knew the difference. The tortoise and the hare. The race between the tortoise and the hare is so old and so widely known that it is easy to forget. It is a story rather than a fact. It has been told so many times, in so many languages, with so many variations, that it has become part of the furniture of the mind, one of those things that we know without quite knowing when we learned it. But the story is worth slowing down for. It is worth hearing again as if for the first time, because it is stranger than it seems. The race is not a fair race. The tortoise cannot win a fair race against the hare. The hare is faster. The hare was always going to be faster. The tortoise's victory is not a triumph of tortoise speed over hare speed. It is a triumph of tortoise character over hare character. This is a more uncomfortable lesson than it appears. It says that the faster creature loses. It says that talent, without the discipline to use it reliably, is not decisive. It says that the slower creature who keeps going wins. Not because the slower creature is better, but because the faster creature stopped. And there is something in this that is both encouraging and melancholy. Encouraging, because it says that persistence matters, that showing up matters, that steady effort accumulates. Melancholy, because the hare was genuinely magnificent. And the hare lost anyway. There was once a hare who was very pleased with his speed. He was the fastest creature in the meadow. He had demonstrated this many times. He ran so fast that sometimes he hardly seemed to touch the ground. He ran for the joy of running, and the running was very joyful because it was easy. The tortoise lived in the same meadow. He was extremely slow. He had always been slow. He would always be slow. He walked on his short, thick legs with a patience that was not virtue so much as nature. He was simply not capable of moving faster, and he had made his peace with this. One day the hare made the mistake of saying something unkind to the tortoise about his pace. He said it carelessly, as fast creatures sometimes say things to slow ones, not with real malice, but with the thoughtlessness of someone who has never had to think about speed. The tortoise looked at the hare. "Race me," said the tortoise. The hare thought this was funny. He agreed immediately. The animals of the meadow gathered to watch, because a race between a hare and a tortoise was something new. The race began. The hare exploded from the starting line with his usual effortless speed, and was far ahead of the tortoise within the first few seconds. He ran and ran, and when he looked back the tortoise was very far behind, barely moving, a speck at the beginning of the course. The hare looked at the tortoise in the distance and looked at the finish line ahead, and did the calculation. He had plenty of time. He was so far ahead that even if he rested, he would still win easily. He found a comfortable spot in the shade of a tree and lay down. He fell asleep. The tortoise walked. He walked with perfect consistency, his pace never varying, each step placed with care, his eyes on the path ahead of him. He passed the sleeping hare and kept walking. He reached the finish line and crossed it. When the hare woke, he ran to the finish line with all his speed. He was too late. The tortoise was not faster than the hare. He was never faster than the hare. He won the race by being consistent where the hare was not, by continuing where the hare stopped, by trusting the slow accumulation of steady effort over the flash of easy speed. This is the most famous of all the fables, and it is famous because it tells a truth that the world keeps needing to hear. Talent is real. Speed is real. The hare's speed was genuinely greater than the tortoise's. But talent unused at the crucial moment is not talent applied. The tortoise's gift was not speed but steadiness. And on the day of the race, steadiness was what mattered. A spendthrift young man had run through his fortune keeping up with his reputation as a good spender. One fine spring morning he found himself with nothing. No money, no property, nothing but the clothes on his back. He was to meet some friends that morning and needed money for appearances. A swallow twittered past. One swallow, cheerful in the early spring air. The young man took the swallow as a sign. Summer was here. He could sell his heavy coat, his good clothes, everything he did not need in warm weather. He went to a clothes dealer and sold all he had down to his undergarments. 3 days later, the weather changed. A hard frost came down. The young man in his thin tunic and bare legs, and the swallow, who had sung so merrily in the fall spring, both barely kept warm through the cold days that followed. One swallow does not make a summer. One warm day is not the season. The young man had decided to quickly, on too little evidence, and paid the price of hurry. The tortoise never hurried. The young man hurried and had nothing. There is a story about a boy who cried wolf. He was a shepherd boy, tending his flock on the hillside above the village, and he was bored. The long quiet days in the field were tedious, and he wanted company and excitement. So he ran to the village calling out that there was a wolf attacking the flock. The villagers came running with their weapons. There was no wolf. The boy laughed at their alarm and they went back to the village, annoyed. A few days later he did it again. The villagers came running again. There was no wolf again. They went back to the village, more annoyed than before. Then a wolf actually came. The boy ran to the village calling that there was a wolf, a real wolf, and the flock needed help. The villagers heard him and stayed where they were. The wolf took many sheep that day. The boy had spent the coin of trust. He had spent it for entertainment. When he needed it, it was gone. Trust once lost is very difficult to recover, and not always recoverable at all. A city mouse once visited his cousin in the country. The country mouse lived in a simple way: wild grain, roots, the occasional berry, a comfortable nest in the hedgerow. He set out his best for his city cousin. The city mouse was polite but clearly unimpressed. "Come to the city," said the city mouse. "I will show you how to really live." The country mouse went to the city. The city cousin's house was magnificent. Scraps from fine feasts, cream from the larder, half-eaten delicacies of every kind. They were eating very well when the door opened and the cook came in, and they had to run and hide in a small dark crack in the wall. They came out again. They began to eat again. Another servant entered and they ran again. They came out. They began. A dog barked nearby and they ran again. The country mouse went home. "Your food is fine," he said, "but you pay for it with your peace. I will keep my simple dinner in my quiet hedgerow." Security and abundance are different goods, and they do not always come together. The city mouse had abundance and no security. The country mouse had security and simple abundance. The choice between them is a real choice, and the fable does not pretend one is obviously better. It simply shows both clearly, and lets the country mouse make his decision with full knowledge of what he is choosing. The steady pace won the race. The careful step made the journey. The country mouse kept his peace. These are old lessons. They are still true. They were true in the 6th century, before the Common Era, and they were true in the Middle Ages, when the fables were copied by monks in cold scriptoriums, and they are true tonight, in the dark, in the quiet, with the animals settled and the fire low. There is a fable about 2 frogs who lived in a pool. The pool was drying up in the summer heat, and the frogs knew that soon the pool would be gone. They discussed the situation. "There is a deep well not far from here," said one frog. "We could jump into the well. What if we cannot get out again?" said the other frog. The first frog had no good answer to this. They sat and thought. The lesson of this fable is sometimes given: look before you leap. But it is more specific than that. The frog proposing the well had seen the problem, the pool drying up, and had identified a solution: the deep well, without thinking through what happened after the solution was implemented. The well solved the problem of the dry pool. It created the problem of not being able to get out. A solution that creates a problem as large as the one it solves is not, on balance, a solution. The second frog's question was the right question. What if we cannot get out again? Before jumping, it is worth asking what the situation looks like from inside the well. The frogs who jump into the well without asking this question learn the answer when it is no longer useful to know it. Look before you leap. Or, more precisely, before you commit to the solution, Consider what the situation looks like after the solution is implemented. The tortoise walked the whole course before he declared the race won. He did not assume that the race would still look the same from the finish line as it had looked from the start. Chapter 12. Trees and Wind and the World. Not all the fables are about animals. Some are about trees and rivers and the wind and the sun and pots and the physical world that surrounds and contains all the animals. These fables reach further than the barnyard and the forest. They say something about the nature of things themselves, about what bends and what breaks, about what lasts and what does not, about the relationship between strength and flexibility, and the kind of force that tests them both. The world of the fable is a world with gods in it, Mercury and Jupiter and the other Olympians, who appear in some of the stories, offering rewards to the honest and punishments to the clever pretenders. But the gods are not the most important force in the fable world. The most important force is consequence, the reliable, patient, consistent consequence that follows from action. The gods underlie it. They do not invent it. The world would be just as consequential without them. What comes from planting seeds in plowed ground is harvest. What comes from standing rigid against great force is breaking. What comes from trying to be everywhere and belong to nothing is belonging nowhere. An oak tree and a reed lived near each other at the edge of a river. The oak was enormous. It had lived for hundreds of years, its roots deep in the earth, its trunk as wide as 3 men together, its branches spreading far over the water. The reed was a thin, flexible stem growing in the river mud. A great storm came. The oak stood against the wind and was uprooted. It crashed into the river, and as it fell, it looked over at the reed, who was still standing, bent nearly flat by the wind, pressed so close to the water that the reeds touched the surface, but not broken. "How is it that you stand?" said the oak, lying in the water. "Because I bend," said the reed. "When the wind comes, I go with it. I have no choice. I am not strong enough to resist, but I am too flexible to break." The oak had stood against the wind in the dignity of its strength, and the wind had been stronger. The reed had no dignity to maintain, only the habit of yielding to what was greater, and rising again when the greater thing had passed. An astrologer lived in a village and spent his evenings studying the stars. He was very serious about the stars. He believed they told him things about the future, about the movements of kingdoms, about what would happen. He walked the open roads in the evening with his eyes fixed on the sky, reading the patterns he found there. One evening he was walking along such a road, reading the sky very carefully, when he fell into a ditch filled with water and mud. There he stood, up to his ears in mud, calling for help, until the villagers came and pulled him out. A villager looked at him. "You read the stars to learn the future," said the villager, "and you cannot see the ditch at your own feet." The astrologer, dripping mud, had nothing to say. The stars may be worth reading, but the ground requires attention too. What is at your feet matters as much as what is above your head, and often more. 2 pots stood on the hearthstone. One was brass and one was earth and clay. The brass pot was adventurous. The earthen pot was cautious. We have already heard what happened when they went out together. How the companionship of the brass pot was the earthen pot's undoing. But there are other lessons in pots. A pot that stays on the hearth does not break in the road. A pot that goes out breaks. The question is not which choice is wiser in the abstract. Both choices have their costs. The question is whether the pot knows what it is made of. A man who knew the stars but not the ditch. A tree that stood but could not bend. A pot that went out without knowing its own fragility. These are figures of the kind of self-knowledge that is difficult and necessary. The oak did not know it was not as flexible as the reed. The astrologer did not know he needed to watch the ground as well as the sky. The earthen pot did not know that the brass pot's company was a threat rather than a protection. Self-knowledge is the beginning of wisdom, not self-congratulation, not pride in what we are. The actual knowledge of what we are, with our limitations and our fragilities and the specific things that will break us. This is what the old stories keep circling. It is not easy knowledge to acquire. The oak stood in the wind for hundreds of years before the wind that toppled it came. The oak could not have known in advance that this particular wind was the one beyond its capacity. The astrologer had been studying the stars successfully 4 years before the evening of the ditch. The earthen pot had survived on the hearth for a long time, before the day the brass pot proposed the journey. Self-knowledge is not something you acquire once and then have. It requires the ongoing willingness to ask, given this situation, given this force, given what I know about my own material, am I the right vessel for this? Am I the right speed for this? Am I the right shape for this moment? The tortoise asked something like this, in his own quiet way, before the race. He knew what he was. He knew what the hare was. He walked anyway, because the walking was what he could do, and what he could do done consistently was enough. A mountain was in great labor one day, producing such terrible sounds and shaking the earth so violently, that all the people of the surrounding country gathered in fear and wonder, expecting some great catastrophe. After a very long time of this, when the mountain had finished its tremendous effort, a small mouse came out. The great effort, the tremendous noise, the fear and wonder and the gathering of the people, all for a mouse. What appears to be enormous preparation and extraordinary effort does not always produce extraordinary results. Sometimes the mountain labors and brings forth a mouse. This fable is about proportion, about the gap between the scale of the announcement and the scale of the result, between the drama of the build-up and the modesty of the outcome. The mountain was not lying. The labor was real. The sound was real. The mouse was real. But the mouse was just a mouse. An oak tree and a willow stood near each other on a riverbank. The oak was proud of his strength and said dismissive things about the willow's flexible, yielding nature. The willow bent and swayed in every wind without complaining, and the oak was contemptuous of this. A great storm came in the night. In the morning the willow was still standing, bent and battered but whole. The oak had fallen, his great roots pulled from the earth by the force of the wind. We have already heard the story of the oak and the reed. Here is the same story with different trees and the same lesson, that what appears to be strength can be brittleness, and what appears to be weakness can be survival. The oak's pride in his strength was not wrong. His strength was real, but it was strength of a kind that could not yield, and what cannot yield eventually breaks. These are the stories about nature itself, the wind and the sun, the mountain and the mouse, the oak and the willow, that place the human stories in a larger frame. The fables include the whole world, not just the barnyard and the forest. The natural world follows its own logic, and the stories that illuminate the natural world's logic illuminate our own logic as well, because we are part of the natural world whether we remember it or not. Trees and wind and the world. Not all the fables are about animals. Some are about trees and rivers and the wind and the sun and pots and the physical world that surrounds and contains all the animals. These fables reach further than the barnyard and the forest. They say something about the nature of things themselves, about what bends and what breaks, about what lasts and what does not, about the relationship between strength and flexibility, and the kind of force that tests them both. The world of the fable is a world with gods in it, Mercury and Jupiter and the other Olympians, who appear in some of the stories, offering rewards to the honest and punishments to the clever pretenders. But the gods are not the most important force in the fable world. The most important force is consequence, the reliable, patient, consistent consequence that follows from action. The gods underlie it. They do not invent it. The world would be just as consequential without them. What comes from planting seeds in plowed ground is harvest. What comes from standing rigid against great force is breaking. What comes from trying to be everywhere and belong to nothing is belonging nowhere. An oak tree and a reed lived near each other at the edge of a river. The oak was enormous. It had lived for hundreds of years, its roots deep in the earth, its trunk as wide as 3 men together, its branches spreading far over the water. The reed was a thin, flexible stem growing in the river mud. A great storm came. The oak stood against the wind and was uprooted. It crashed into the river, and as it fell, It looked over at the reed, who was still standing, bent nearly flat by the wind, pressed so close to the water that the reeds touched the surface, but not broken. "How is it that you stand?" said the oak, lying in the water. "Because I bend," said the reed. "When the wind comes, I go with it. I have no choice. I'm not strong enough to resist, but I am too flexible to break." The oak had stood against the wind in the dignity of its strength, and the wind had been stronger. The reed had no dignity to maintain, only the habit of yielding to what was greater, and rising again when the greater thing had passed. An astrologer lived in a village and spent his evenings studying the stars. He was very serious about the stars. He believed they told him things about the future, about the movements of kingdoms, about what would happen. He walked the open roads in the evening with his eyes fixed on the sky, reading the patterns he found there. One evening he was walking along such a road, reading the sky very carefully, when he fell into a ditch filled with water and mud. There he stood, up to his ears in mud, calling for help, until the villagers came and pulled him out. A villager looked at him. "You read the stars to learn the future," said the villager, "and you cannot see the ditch at your own feet." The astrologer, dripping mud, had nothing to say. The stars may be worth reading, but the ground requires attention too. What is at your feet matters as much as what is above your head, and often more. 2 pots stood on the hearthstone. One was brass and one was earth and clay. The brass pot was adventurous. The earthen pot was cautious. We have already heard what happened when they went out together. How the companionship of the brass pot was the earthen pot's undoing. But there are other lessons in pots. A pot that stays on the hearth does not break in the road. A pot that goes out breaks. The question is not which choice is wiser in the abstract. Both choices have their costs. The question is whether the pot knows what it is made of. A man who knew the stars but not the ditch. A tree that stood but could not bend. A pot that went out without knowing its own fragility. These are figures of the kind of self-knowledge that is difficult and necessary. The oak did not know it was not as flexible as the reed. The astrologer did not know he needed to watch the ground as well as the sky. The earthen pot did not know that the brass pot's company was a threat rather than a protection. Self-knowledge is the beginning of wisdom, not self-congratulation, not pride in what we are. The actual knowledge of what we are, with our limitations and our fragilities and the specific things that will break us. This is what the old stories keep circling. It is not easy knowledge to acquire. The oak stood in the wind for hundreds of years before the wind that toppled it came. The oak could not have known in advance that this particular wind was the one beyond its capacity. The astrologer had been studying the stars successfully 4 years before the evening of the ditch. The earthen pot had survived on the hearth for a long time, before the day the brass pot proposed the journey. Self-knowledge is not something you acquire once and then have. It requires the ongoing willingness to ask, given this situation, given this force, given what I know about my own material, am I the right vessel for this? Am I the right speed for this? Am I the right shape for this moment? The tortoise asked something like this, in his own quiet way, before the race. He knew what he was. He knew what the hare was. He walked anyway, because the walking was what he could do, and what he could do done consistently was enough. A mountain was in great labor one day, producing such terrible sounds and shaking the earth so violently, that all the people of the surrounding country gathered in fear and wonder, expecting some great catastrophe. After a very long time of this, when the mountain had finished its tremendous effort, a small mouse came out. The great effort, the tremendous noise, the fear and wonder and the gathering of the people, all for a mouse. What appears to be enormous preparation and extraordinary effort does not always produce extraordinary results. Sometimes the mountain labors and brings forth a mouse. This fable is about proportion, about the gap between the scale of the announcement and the scale of the result, between the drama of the build-up and the modesty of the outcome. The mountain was not lying. The labor was real. The sound was real. The mouse was real. But the mouse was just a mouse. An oak tree and a willow stood near each other on a riverbank. The oak was proud of his strength and said dismissive things about the willow's flexible, yielding nature. The willow bent and swayed in every wind without complaining, and the oak was contemptuous of this. A great storm came in the night. In the morning the willow was still standing, bent and battered but whole. The oak had fallen, his great roots pulled from the earth by the force of the wind. We have already heard the story of the oak and the reed. Here is the same story with different trees and the same lesson, that what appears to be strength can be brittleness, and what appears to be weakness can be survival. The oak's pride in his strength was not wrong. His strength was real, but it was strength of a kind that could not yield, and what cannot yield eventually breaks. These are the stories about nature itself, the wind and the sun, the mountain and the mouse, the oak and the willow, that place the human stories in a larger frame. The fables include the whole world, not just the barnyard and the forest. The natural world follows its own logic, and the stories that illuminate the natural world's logic illuminate our own logic as well, because we are part of the natural world whether we remember it or not. What we learn. We come now to the end of the evening, and the animals are settling into the dark around us. The lion is in the shade. The fox is moving quietly through the trees. The tortoise has reached the finish line, and the hare is just waking up. The ant has closed her storehouse for the winter. The crow is carrying her pebble to the pitcher's edge. The woodman is walking home with 3 axes. The farmer's sons are counting a good harvest. The stories are done, but the morals remain. They remain the way that all the old sayings remain, as available wisdom, ready to be picked up when the situation requires it. Do not stop to argue with temptation. In unity is strength. Honesty is the best policy. Look before you leap. There are some other fables worth gathering here, before the evening ends. Stories that do not fit neatly into a single theme, but that belong in the collection. There was a stag who came to drink at a pool and admired his own reflection in the water. His antlers were magnificent, broad and branching, catching the light. Things of beauty. His legs, by comparison, looked to him thin and ungainly. He was ashamed of his legs. Then a lion appeared on the bank. The stag ran. His legs, those thin and ungainly things, carried him away across the open ground, faster than the lion could follow. He was going to escape. Then he entered a thicket and his great antlers caught in the branches. He struggled. He could not free himself in time. We often despise what saves us and admire what destroys us. There was a serpent in a farmer's yard who had been biting the farmer's children. The farmer, in grief, took his axe and went to the serpent's hole and waited. When the serpent came out, the farmer struck but missed, and the serpent went back into the hole. The next day the farmer came to the hole and offered to make peace with the serpent. He brought good things to the hole and spoke of reconciliation. "No," said the serpent from within the hole. "You stand there with the mark of your axe in the tree, and I stand here where your children were bitten. Between us there is too much for peace to live. Some wounds are too large for peace. Not every story ends in resolution. Not every enemy can be reconciled." The farmer and the serpent knew their history and could not pretend otherwise. There was a man who bought a young parrot and kept it in his house. The parrot learned to speak by listening to what was said in the house. One day the parrot, talking freely in the market, said some things that were heard by people who should not have heard them. The parrot's owner was in trouble because of what the parrot had said. He blamed the parrot, who protested. "I only repeated what I heard in your house. Be careful what you say in the presence of those who will repeat it." This is a practical lesson that remains entirely practical today. A young man was swimming in a river and began to drown. He called out to a man on the bank to help him. The man on the bank began to scold him for swimming in a dangerous part of the river. "Please," said the young man, "help me first. Scold me afterward." The reproof given while the person is drowning is the reproof that helps no one. There is a time for correction and a time for help, and knowing which time it is requires more attention to the situation than the man on the bank was giving. There was once a merchant who went on a long journey, leaving his house in the care of a trusted friend. When he came back after many months, he found that a beam in the roof had rotted, and the house had been damaged by rain, and his trusted friend had not done anything about it. The friend had two things to say. First, that he had been very busy with his own affairs. Second, that he had not wanted to overstep by making decisions about someone else's house. The merchant listened to both explanations. Then he pointed out that a trusted friend is trusted precisely to act when action is needed, even inconvenient action, even action in someone else's house. A friend who can be trusted only when trust is convenient is a fair-weather friend, present when things are easy, absent when things are hard. There is a woman in the old fables who was very jealous of her husband. She watched him constantly, suspected him of everything, and questioned every person he spoke with. Her jealousy made her husband's life difficult and eventually drove him away. She went to a wise woman and asked what she could do to win her husband back. The wise woman gave her a bottle. "Put 3 drops of this on your husband's cloak each morning," said the wise woman. "But you must be silent while you do it. If you speak, the charm will not work." For 3 weeks the woman rose each morning before her husband and put 3 drops on his cloak, and said nothing, and then went about her day. At the end of 3 weeks her husband had returned to her and was kinder than he had ever been. "What was in the bottle?" she asked the wise woman. "Water," said the wise woman. It was water. The charm was the silence. You discovered that your silence was better for your marriage than your suspicion. Be careful what words you send out. They cannot be recalled. The parrot repeated what he heard. The jealous wife had been saying all the things that drove the husband away. The man on the bank was saying things that helped no one, while a man was drowning. Aesop's stories have a structure that is so simple it becomes invisible after a while. An animal is in a situation. The animal makes a choice. The choice has a consequence. At the end, a moral, a single sentence, brief and clear, that names what the story was showing. The moral does not explain the story. It simply stands beside the story and names what was already visible, for those who want the name. The simplicity is deliberate. The world is complicated. The things that go wrong in the world are complicated. But the reasons they go wrong are often not complicated at all. They are simple. They are simple enough to fit into a fable about a fox and a goat, a dog and a manger, a tortoise and a hare. The complication is in the world. The reason is simple. Do not stop to argue with temptation. In unity is strength. Honesty is the best policy. Look before you leap. Even the weakest may find means to avenge a wrong. It is wiser to bear a single injury in silence than to provoke 1,000 by flying into rage. These maxims are not sophisticated. They are not the conclusions of philosophy or the output of careful analysis. They are observations, accumulated over many centuries, about how things go wrong for creatures who make predictable mistakes. The dog stops to argue. The bullocks quarrel and separate. The woodman's neighbors try to fake the honesty that won the reward. The goose's owner kills the goose. The hare sleeps. The simplicity of the fable is part of its honesty. The things that cause our undoing are often simple things. We know they are mistakes while we are making them, or we knew before we made them, or we knew and forgot at the crucial moment. The fable names the mistake, clearly, at the end, so that the listener goes away with the name of the mistake in mind. Not all the fables have happy endings. The mouse who was drowned by the frog had done nothing wrong. The frogs who were trampled by the bull had done nothing wrong. The innocent suffer in the fables as they suffer in the world, without the story pretending otherwise. The fables are not always stories of justice, but they are always stories of cause and consequence. Something happens, and then something follows from it. The wolf in sheep's clothing gets caught. The bear who attacked the hive runs to the pond. The mule who boasted about his fathers spends the next day in harness. The chain of cause and consequence is reliable and patient. It does not always work immediately. It does not always punish the guilty and reward the innocent in the right order, or the right proportion, but it works. A wind and the sun once had a dispute about which of them was more powerful. They agreed to settle it by a test. A traveler was walking along the road below them, wrapped in a cloak. Whichever of them could remove the cloak first would be declared the stronger. The wind went first. He blew with all his might, great gusts that bent the trees, and sent leaves spinning across the road. The traveler clutched his cloak more tightly, pressing it against him, leaning into the wind. The harder the wind blew, the tighter the traveler held the cloak. The sun came out from behind the clouds. He shone. He simply shone, warmly and steadily, letting the warmth fall on the traveler's shoulders and back and face. The traveler began to feel warm. He loosened the cloak. He loosened it more. He took it off and folded it over his arm. Persuasion accomplishes more than force. The wind pushed harder and got nothing. The sun applied warmth, and the traveler's own comfort did the rest. There is a kind of argument that looks like strength and is not. The wind had real power. The wind's power was real enough to uproot trees and send ships across the water. But applied to a traveler and a cloak, the wind's power worked against itself. The more power the wind applied, the more the traveler resisted. The sun applied warmth. Warmth is not usually considered a form of power, but on that day, with that traveler, warmth was the more powerful thing. This is worth thinking about slowly. Not all the fables are about animals making mistakes. Some of them are about finding the right kind of force for the right kind of problem. The wind was not wrong to be powerful. The wind was wrong to assume that its particular kind of power was the kind that would work here. A horse was troubled by a stag that invaded his meadow and drove him off the good grass. The horse was angry. He went to a man and proposed a partnership. The man would help him drive off the stag, if the horse allowed the man to ride him. The man agreed and got on the horse's back and helped him drive off the stag. But then the man did not get off. He kept riding the horse, kept the bit in his mouth, and the saddle on his back. The horse had his meadow back, but he had lost his freedom in the trade. Do not give away your freedom in the resolution of a temporary problem. The stag was a nuisance. The stag could have been waited out. The man on the horse's back was permanent. The horse, in his anger at the stag, had not thought past the moment of the stag's removal to the morning after, when the stag would be gone, and the man would still be there. Anger is a poor advisor. The horse was angry enough to make a permanent trade for a temporary gain, and when the anger passed, the trade remained. An ant and a grasshopper lived near each other in a meadow. The summer was long and warm, and full of good things to eat and pleasant air to move through. The grasshopper spent the summer, as grasshoppers do, leaping and singing, eating as he needed, moving as the spirit moved him. The summer was good and the grasshopper was good in the summer. The ant spent the summer carrying food to her underground storehouse. Each day she carried more than she needed for the day, setting aside a surplus. The grasshopper watched her and shook his head at the waste of good summer. "Come and sing with me," he said. The ant kept carrying. Winter came. The meadow was cold and bare. The grasshopper had nothing. He had stored nothing. Because summer had seemed so endless and the storing had seemed such a waste of the good warm days, he went to the ant's door and knocked. He was very hungry. Could she spare some food? The ant thought about the question. She had enough. She had planned ahead to have enough. She had worked through the summer for this. "Did you work in the summer?" asked the ant. "No," said the grasshopper. "I sang." "Then sing in the winter," said the ant, and closed the door. This fable is told as a story about the virtue of preparation and the folly of improvidence. And it is that. But it is also worth noting that the grasshopper's summer was genuinely good. He sang. He leaped. He lived fully in the season he had. The ant's summer was also good, in a different way, purposeful, accumulating, building toward what the ant knew was coming. Neither summer was wrong. What was wrong was the grasshopper's belief that the summer would last, or that the winter would not require preparation. A man had two wives. One was older than he was and one was younger. Each of them wanted him to look as much as possible like her own age. The older wife pulled out his black hairs. The younger wife pulled out his grey ones. They both worked very diligently at this. When they were done, the man was bald. "If you try to please everyone, You may end by pleasing no one and having nothing left. A man and his son were once traveling with their donkey. They encountered a group of townspeople who laughed at them for walking when they had a donkey to ride. So the man put his son on the donkey. They met more people who criticized the son for making his old father walk. So the father got on and the son walked. They met others who criticized the father for riding while the boy walked. So they both got on. They met more who thought it cruel to put so much weight on the poor donkey. So they got off and began to carry the donkey. As they were crossing a bridge, the donkey slipped and fell into the river. The fable has a sharp point. There is no arrangement that pleases everyone. There are always observers who will find fault with any choice that is made. The man who tries to satisfy each criticism as it comes eventually loses everything he started with. He should have mounted his donkey and ridden it at the beginning and ridden past the critics. A man and his young son once came to a fair in a nearby town. They had saved all year for the occasion. At the fair they played games and ate good food and saw remarkable things. They were very happy. On the way home, as it was getting dark, the man let his son ride on his back to carry him since the boy was tired. An old man saw them. Young people these days, said the old man, no respect for their elders. There is the young riding and the old walking. The father put his son down and rode on his son's back instead. Another person shook his head at this. Shame, said the person. The father riding and making the child walk. The father got down and walked beside the boy. A third person laughed. What a pair, said the third person, both walking when one of them could ride. The father and son arrived home. The father sat down and looked at his son. There are always people who will comment, said the father. There is always someone who can find something to say about what you are doing. If you try to answer each one, you will have done nothing but answer comments. He poured them each a cup of water. They drank. They were home. The chain of cause and consequence is reliable and patient. The ant's winter was warm, and the grasshopper's winter was cold. The man's head was bald, and his donkey was in the river. These consequences follow from choices that seem reasonable one at a time and absurd in sequence. This is the comfort of the fables, and it is a modest comfort. The world has a logic to it. The logic is not always just, but it is consistent. When you know the logic, when you have heard enough stories about what happens, when you argue with temptation and sleep through your advantage and hoard what you cannot use, you can read the shape of the situation you are in, and recognize what is likely to follow. The old farmer on his deathbed knew this. He gave his sons the inheritance of labor, rather than the inheritance of gold, because he knew that labor reliably produces harvest in a way that gold in a box does not. He knew the logic of the earth. He knew what happened when the soil was worked, and what happened when it was neglected. The tortoise knew the logic of the race, not because he was wise in some elevated sense, but because he knew exactly what he was capable of, and he kept doing it, without drama, until the race was finished. He did not comfort himself with the gap between his speed and the hare's. He did not pretend the hare was not faster. He simply walked. All the animals of the old stories know something that most of them cannot fully articulate. The fox knows his own cleverness and the limits of it. The eagle knows her sky, but not the beetle's patience. The woodman knows the value of his own plain axe without needing to claim the gold one. The cock knows that the fox who wants to celebrate is a fox who wants a cock, and he watches for the thing that will make the fox run. This knowledge is not safety. The fables are full of creatures who knew something and were nonetheless defeated, or undone, by circumstance, by the power of stronger animals, by the unpredictable consequences of the right choice in the wrong situation. The earthen pot that stayed home was not broken on the road, but it also never went anywhere. We go out. We take our chances. We make our choices, and the choices have consequences, and the consequences have their own logic. And the logic has been illustrated in these stories for 2,500 years. There is a kind of comfort in this, not the comfort of safety. The fables do not promise safety, not the comfort of justice. The fables do not promise that the lamb always escapes the wolf. but the comfort of pattern. The world has a shape. The same situations appear again and again, in different clothes, in different centuries, with different animals. The same mistakes produce the same consequences. The same wisdom, applied at the right moment, produces the same survival. This means that the stories are useful, not as instructions. You cannot simply copy the fox's strategy and expect it to work in your particular world with your particular goat, but as maps of the territory. The person who knows the shape of the wolf and shepherd story is prepared for the version of that story that appears in our own life. The person who knows the shape of the hare's mistake is prepared for the version of it that appears in her own experience. Not safe from it, prepared for it, able to recognize it before it becomes the ending. That is a long time for a story to survive. The stories have survived because they are true, and they have remained true because the things they describe about human nature are things that human nature has not changed in the years since Aesop sat by his fire. The animals talk. The animals make their mistakes. The animals receive their consequences. And we listen, in the dark, and recognize ourselves in them. Aesop's life is mostly legend. The historical Aesop is almost impossible to distinguish from the mythological Aesop. We know that he was a real person because multiple ancient sources refer to him as a real person, and because the tradition of fables attributed to him is too old and too consistent to have been invented after the fact. We know that he was a slave. The ancient sources agree on this, and we know that he was famous for his intelligence and his storytelling, and that his reputation was great enough to survive his death by many centuries. The story that he was killed at Delphi, thrown from a cliff by the Delphians, who found him offensive, is one of the more dramatic accounts. Delphi was the site of the great oracle, the sanctuary of Apollo, where people came from all over the Greek world to ask questions of the god and receive answers in riddles. Aesop's relationship with riddles and with the powerful was not always comfortable. A man who spent his life making powerful animals look foolish in short stories was not necessarily going to end well at the home of a god, known for his responses to the presumptuous. Whether the story of Delphi is true, it captures something real about the position of a person like Aesop in the ancient world, someone who observed the powerful and the clever and the vain without flattering them, and who told stories that named what he saw. Such a person is useful and dangerous at the same time. The powerful like to be admired. They are less comfortable being understood. The fables spread without their author. In the centuries after Aesop's death, the stories were told and retold and new ones were added. Scholars in Alexandria, the great library city of the ancient world, collected and organized fables attributed to Aesop. Roman writers like Phaedrus and Babrius translated and expanded the tradition in Latin and Greek verse. In the 1st century of the Common Era, the fables were being used in schools across the Roman Empire to teach Latin and Greek to children, which is why we know them so well. They were educational texts, as they had been in the ancient world, as they continue to be in various forms. The fables outlasted the Roman Empire. In the medieval period, they were collected and retold in many European languages. In the 12th century, a woman known to history only as Marie de France translated fables from English into French, adding her own. In the 17th century, the French poet Jean de La Fontaine wrote extended verse fables that are still read in French schools. The Russian poet Ivan Krylov wrote fables in the 18th and 19th centuries that are still memorized by Russian schoolchildren. The tradition is alive in every major language that has a tradition of written literature. Why do they survive? The simplest answer is that they are very short. A fable of 200 words is easy to remember. It has a clear shape, situation, action, consequence, moral. It can be told in a few minutes around a fire, or on a walk, or at a child's bedside. It does not require special context. It does not require that the listener already know other things. It is complete in itself. The completeness is part of what makes the fable different from other narrative forms. A novel requires a commitment of days or weeks. An epic requires an understanding of which hero you are following and why it matters. A fable requires nothing but a few minutes of attention and the willingness to be shown something. It arrives and it leaves. It says its piece and then it is done. The Aesop tradition is also distinguished by its indifference to the particular. The fable does not need to be set anywhere specific or at any specific time, because its truths belong to all places and all times equally. The fable does not care what city the wolf is from or what the fox's name is. The wolf is any wolf. The fox is any fox. The dog at the bridge is any dog at any bridge where there is water and reflection, and a piece of meat and the temptation to reach for more than you have. The indifference to the particular is what makes the fable universal. The stories are not about specific situations in specific places in specific historical moments. They are about recurring situations that appear in every place in every historical moment. This is why they translate. A fable translated from Greek to Latin to French to Russian to English loses almost nothing in the journey. The wolf in the sheep's clothing is just as recognizable in Russian as in Greek, because the thing the wolf in sheep's clothing represents is just as present in Russia as in Greece, in the 21st century as in the 6th century, before the Common Era. The story is the same because the thing it shows has not changed. The Aesop fables were used as school texts in Greece and Rome not just because they were short and memorable, but because they introduced children to the logic of the moral world, to the idea that choices have consequences, that certain kinds of choices reliably have certain kinds of consequences, and that knowing the pattern in advance is better than discovering it in the moment of undoing. A child who has heard the story of the boy who cried wolf understands something true about trust and its expenditure before she has needed to apply the lesson. The story gives her the shape of the situation before life presents the situation. The same is true of all of them. We hear the hare's story before we are old enough to be the hare. We hear the lamb's story before we encounter the wolf who is interested in eating us, rather than arguing fairly. We hear the ant's story before the first summer that seems too good to bother storing against winter. The fables are advance briefings for situations that will arrive, but the survival of the fables is also about their content. The animals in the fables are doing things that people recognize immediately, because people are doing these things every day. The dog who stops to argue with temptation and loses what he was carrying is everywhere. The goose's owner, who destroys what produces for him the good thing, in the attempt to get more of the good thing at once, is a permanent feature of human experience. The hare who sleeps when he should be running, the talent that assumes it doesn't have to show up, is in every field and every organization and every relationship, where someone assumed that being better meant they didn't have to try. The tortoise just keeps walking. He has been walking for 2,500 years. He's probably still ahead. There is something worth saying about the fables that are the most uncomfortable to hear. The lamb at the stream, for instance. The wolf wanted to eat the lamb. The wolf invented an accusation. The lamb answered the accusation correctly, and the wolf ate the lamb anyway. The lesson is clear. Some situations have no safe outcome. Being right does not protect you from someone stronger, who is determined to eat you. This is not a pleasant lesson. It does not suggest virtue or cleverness as reliable protection. It suggests that the world contains powerful creatures with appetites, and that correct argument does not stop those creatures. The lamb's mistake was in having the conversation at all, in assuming that the wolf was interested in justice. The fable does not tell the lamb what to do instead. It does not offer a safe strategy. It simply shows what happened and names it. There are situations in which there is no good answer. Knowing this is itself a form of knowledge, even if it is not a comfortable one. There is also the fable of the frogs who were trampled by the bulls. The bulls were fighting each other. The frogs were in the marsh below, minding their own affairs, and the bulls fighting brought the bulls to the marsh, and the frogs died. They had done nothing wrong. They had no way to prevent it. The great quarrel of the powerful destroyed the small and innocent as a side effect. These fables are paired with all the ones in which virtue is rewarded, and patience wins the race, and honesty gets 3 X's. The collection includes both. The world is both. The woodman's honesty was rewarded. The lamb's logic was ignored. Both things are true. The fables do not resolve this. They present it. They say, this is the world. The world contains both Mercury's reward and the wolf's appetite. The wise creature knows both stories and tries to be in the right one, and sometimes succeeds and sometimes cannot tell until it is too late which story it is in. There is an old man in the fables who was chopping wood in the forest when his axe grew heavy, and his strength gave out. He sat down under a tree and called out, in exhaustion and despair, for death to come and take him. Death appeared immediately. "I am here," said Death. "What do you want?" The old man looked at Death for a moment. "Could you help me get these sticks up onto my shoulders?" he said. He had summoned Death without meaning to keep the appointment. When Death arrived, life seemed suddenly preferable. He had a woodpile to carry. He had things to do. He was tired, but he was not so tired as all that. Death helped him with the sticks and went away. The old man carried his wood home. There is a kind of wisdom in the old man's quick revision. He had called out in a moment of exhaustion, and the moment had passed. He was not ashamed of having called. He was ready to move on from having called. He picked up the sticks. This is one of the quietest lessons in the collection. Not every despair is final. Not every call in the dark is the last one. The old man called for Death, and then discovered he had more wood to carry. He carried it. The fire that Aesop sat beside burned for a while, and went out, as fires do. But the stories kept burning because the animals in them were not really animals. They were us, drawn with enough simplicity to see clearly, with enough humor to hear without defensiveness, with enough truth to remember. The wolf is hungry. The fox is clever. The dog is faithful until temptation becomes argument. The mule forgets who he is when he rests long enough. The eagle rules the sky, and the beetle is patient in the earth. And the eagle does not understand, until it is too late, that patience is also a kind of power. The lion was generous with the mouse and did not expect to need the mouse's help, and one day needed the mouse's help. The woodman was honest with the god, not knowing that honesty would be rewarded, and it was. The tortoise walked without expectation that walking would win the race, and walking won the race. The goose laid 1 golden egg per day, and that was enough for a long time. And then it was not enough. And then there was nothing. The ant worked through the summer because she knew about winter, and the grasshopper sang because the summer was good. Both of them were right about the season they were in. The night is quiet. The animals of the old stories have settled back into the dark where they always live. They are always there, in the tall grass and the deep forest and the river shallows, living their careful lives, making their predictable mistakes, occasionally surprising us with wisdom we did not expect from a small creature in a short story. The cock is asleep on his fence post. The tortoise has crossed the finish line. The woodman has his 3 X's. The honest one, the silver one, the gold. Sleep now. The fire is low. The animals are resting. The old world is quiet. And the stories are still there, waiting for the next person who needs to hear them. There is one more thing to say before the night becomes complete silence. The tradition of the fable did not begin with Aesop. It was already old when Aesop was telling his stories in the 6th century, before the Common Era. Hesiod, who wrote his long poem about farm life and the cycles of the seasons perhaps 2 centuries before. Aesop included a fable in it, the hawk and the nightingale. A hawk caught a nightingale, and the nightingale cried out in pain. The hawk said, "Be quiet. I am stronger than you. I will do with you what I choose, whether you sing or lament." It is foolish to argue with someone who is stronger. It is a harder lesson than most of the Aesop fables. It is not about cleverness or preparation or the virtue of steadiness. It is about the plain fact of power. Hesiod's fable, inserted into a poem about justice and injustice, is the voice of the powerful speaking honestly for once. Hesiod quotes it in order to argue against it. He believes in the existence of justice. even in a world where hawks eat nightingales. But the hawk's speech is there, in the oldest surviving Greek text to include a fable, saying the uncomfortable thing. Aesop's tradition absorbed this and turned it into something more complex. The beetle who takes revenge on the eagle. The lion who finds the mouse useful. The moment when the smaller creature is not defeated. When patience and intelligence and timing work in favor of the one who seemed to have no advantages. The Aesop tradition does not pretend the hawk and the nightingale is not true. It adds other truths beside it. And so we have 2,500 years of stories about the world, the unfair world, and the fair world. The world where power does as it wishes, and the world where cleverness finds a way. The world where the wolf eats the lamb because the wolf is stronger, and the world where the beetle outlasts the eagle because patience goes where power cannot follow. Both worlds are real. Both are present in the fables. We live in both at once. The Aesop tradition is a tradition of honesty about this. It does not promise that virtue is always rewarded, or that cleverness is always sufficient. It promises only that the pattern is consistent, that what you put in tends to produce what you get out, that the nature of the animal tends to produce the nature of the outcome, that the choices made in the good weather tend to determine what is available in the bad. Not always, not perfectly, but consistently enough to learn from. Consistently enough to prepare. The ancient scholars who gathered these stories into collections and gave them to children in schools had noticed this. The stories are given to children not because children are naive enough to believe in talking animals. Children understand that foxes do not talk. They are given to children because children have not yet encountered all the situations the fables describe, and the fable is a preparation. A briefing before the experience. A map before the territory. The child who hears the hare's story has the hare's mistake in her mind when, years later, she finds herself ahead of the competition and tempted to rest. She has the story available. She knows what it leads to. This is the quiet purpose of the whole tradition. Not instruction. Not morality enforced from above. But preparation, offered gently, in the form of animals, in the dark. To listeners who are nearly asleep and whose minds are open and receiving. The old man who called for death, and then asked death to help him with his wood went home, and built a fire. The fire burned through the evening and went out. He slept. He woke. He went back to the forest the next morning for more wood. This is also one of the stories. The quiet continuation of ordinary things. The fire built and let go out. The wood fetched again in the morning. The small ordinary life that goes on beside the large stories, and the large lessons, unrecorded, unmoralized, simply continuing. The animals of the fables are asleep in the dark. The lion is in the shade. The tortoise has reached whatever finish line he was walking toward. The fox is quiet in the forest. The eagle is folded on her crag. The beetle is in the earth below, where nothing can reach her. The night is generous. It asks nothing of you. It only asks that you rest. Sleep now. The fables are told. The morals are offered. The world with all its hawks and nightingales, all its tortoises and hares, all its woodmen and foxes and patient ants and sleepy grasshoppers, will be there in the morning, as it always is. Sleep. The stories know where to find you. The old world is very quiet now. The fire has been low for a long time. Somewhere in the dark the tortoise is still moving forward, very slowly, placing each foot with care. The ant's storehouse is full. The woodman's 3 axes are hanging on the wall. The honest one, the plain one, will be there in the morning. That is enough. That is the whole of it. The tortoise put one foot in front of the other and kept walking and arrived. Sleep now.